Hospital Sketches by Louisa May Alcott. These sketches are respectfully dedicated to her friend, Miss Hannah Stevenson, by L.M.A. This recording by Aaron Elliott. Chapter 1. Obtaining Supplies. I want something to do. This remark, being addressed to the world in general, no one in particular felt it their duty to reply, so I repeated it to the smaller world about me, receiving the following suggestions, and settled the matter by answering my own inquiry, as people are apt to do when very much in earnest. "Write a book," quoth the author of my being. "Don't know enough, sir. First live, then write." "Try teaching again," suggested my mother. "No, thank you, ma'am. 10 years of that is enough." "Take a husband like my Darby, and fulfill your mission," said Sister Joan, home on a visit. "Can't afford expensive luxuries, Mrs. Coobiddy." "Turn actress and immortalize your name," said Sister Vashti, striking an attitude. "I won't." "Go nurse the soldiers," said my young brother Tom, panting for the tented field. "I will." So far, very good. Here was the will, now for the way. At first sight, not a foot of it appeared, but that didn't matter, for the Periwinkles are a hopeful race. Their crest is an anchor, with 3 cockadoodles crowing atop. They all wear rose-colored spectacles and are lineal descendants of the inventor of aerial architecture. An hour's conversation on that subject set the whole family in a blaze of enthusiasm. A model hospital was erected, and each member had accepted an honorable post therein. The paternal P was chaplain, the maternal P was matron, and all the youthful P's filled the pot of futurity with achievements whose brilliancy eclipsed the glories of the present and the past. Arriving at this satisfactory conclusion, the meeting adjourned, and the fact that Miss Tribulation was available as army nurse went abroad on the wings of the wind. In a few days, a townswoman heard of my desire, approved of it, and brought about an interview with one of the sisterhood which I wished to join, who is at home on a furlough, and able and willing to satisfy all inquiries. A morning chat with Miss General S. We hear no end of Mrs. Generals, why not a Miss? Produced 3 results. I felt that I could do the work, was offered a place, and accepted it, promising not to desert, but stand ready to march on Washington at an hour's notice. A few days were necessary for the letter containing my request and recommendation to reach headquarters, and another containing my commission to return. Therefore no time was to be lost, and heartily thanking my pair of friends, I tore home through the December slush as if the rebels were after me, and like many another recruit burst in upon my family with the announcement, "I've enlisted!" An impressive silence followed. Tom, the irrepressible, broke it with a slap on the shoulder and the grateful compliment, "Old Trib, you're a trump!" "Thank you, then I'll take something," which I did in the shape of dinner, reeling off my news at the rate of 3 dozen words to a mouthful, and as everyone else talked equally fast, and altogether the scene was most inspiring. As boys going to sea immediately become nautical in speech, walk as if they already had their sea legs on, and shiver their timbers on all possible occasions, so I turned military at once, called my dinner my rations, saluted all newcomers, and ordered a dress parade that very afternoon. Having reviewed every rag I possessed, I detailed some for picket duty while airing over the fence, some to the sanitary influences of the wash-tub, others to mount guard in the trunk, while the weak and wounded went to the work-basket hospital to be made ready for active service again. To this squad I devoted myself for a week, but all was done, and I had time to get powerfully impatient before the letter came. It did arrive, however, and brought a disappointment along with its goodwill and friendliness, for it told me that the place in the Armory Hospital that I supposed I was to take was already filled, and a much less desirable one at Hurly-Burly House was offered instead. "That's just your luck, Trib. I'll tote your trunk up garret for you again, for of course you won't go," Tom remarked with the disdainful pity which small boys affect when they get into their teens. I was wavering in my secret soul, but that settled the matter, and I crushed him on the spot with martial brevity. It is now 1. I shall march at 6. I have a confused recollection of spending the afternoon in pervading the house like an executive whirlwind, with my family swarming after me, all working, talking, prophesizing, and lamenting, while I packed my go-abroady possessions, tumbled the rest into 2 big boxes, danced on the lids till they shut, and gave them in charge with the direction, "If I never come back, make a bonfire of them." Then I choked down a cup of tea, generously salted instead of sugared by some agitated relative, shouldered my knapsack — it was only a traveling bag, but do let me preserve the unities — hugged my family 3 times all around without a vestige of unmanly emotion, till a certain dear old lady broke down upon my neck with a despairing sort of wail. "Oh, my dear, how can I let you go?" "I'll stay if you say so, Mother." "But I don't. Go, and the Lord will take care of you." Much of the Roman matron's courage had gone into the Yankee matron's composition, and, in spite of her tears, she would have sent 10 sons to the war, had she possessed them, as freely as she sent 1 daughter, smiling and flapping on the doorstep till I vanished, though the eyes that followed me were very dim, and the handkerchief she waved was very wet. My transit from the Gables to the village depot was a funny mixture of good wishes and goodbyes, mud puddles and shopping. A December twilight is not the most cheering time to enter upon a somewhat perilous enterprise, and, but for the presence of Vashti and neighbor Thorne, I fear that I might have added a drop of the briny to the native moisture of "the town I left behind me," though I'd no thought of giving out. Oh, bless you, no. When the engine screeched, "Here we are," I clutched my escort in a fervent embrace and skipped into the car with as blithe a farewell as if going on a bridal tour, though I believe brides don't usually wear cavernous black bonnets and fuzzy brown coats, with a hairbrush, a pair of rubbers, 2 books, and a bag of gingerbread distorting the pockets of the same. If I thought that anyone would believe it, I'd boldly state that I slept from C to B, which would simplify matters immensely, but as I know they wouldn't, I'll confess that the head under the funeral coal hod fermented with all manner of high thoughts and heroic purposes, to do or die, perhaps both, and the heart under the fuzzy brown coat felt very tender with the memory of the dear old lady, probably sobbing over her army socks and the loss of her topsy-turvy trib. At this juncture, I took the veil, and what I did behind it is nobody's business, but I maintain that the soldier who cries when his mother says goodbye is the boy to fight best and die bravest when the time comes, or go back to her better than he went. Till 9 o'clock I trotted about the city streets, doing those last errands which no woman would even go to heaven without attempting if she could. Then I went to my usual refuge, and, fully intending to keep awake as a sort of visual appropriate to the occasion, fell fast asleep and dreamed propitious dreams till my rosy-faced cousin waked me with a kiss. A bright day smiled upon my enterprise, and at 10 I reported myself to my general, received last instructions, and no end of the sympathetic encouragement which women give in look, touch, and tone more effectually than in words. The next step was to get a free pass to Washington, for I'd no desire to waste my substance on railroad companies when the boys needed even a spinster's mite. A friend of mine had procured such a pass, and I was bent on doing likewise, though I had to face the president of the railroad to accomplish it. I'm a bashful individual, though I can't get anyone to believe it, so it cost me a great effort to poke about the Worcester depot till the right door appeared, then walk into a room containing several gentlemen, and blunder out my request in a high state of stammer and blush. Nothing could have been more courteous than this dreaded president, but it was evident that I had made as absurd a demand as if I had asked for the nose off his respectable face. He referred me to the governor at the State House, and I backed out, leaving him no doubt to regret that such mild maniacs were left at charge. Here was a Scylla and Charybdis business, as if a president wasn't trying enough without the governor of Massachusetts and the hub of the hub piled on top of that. I never can do it, thought I. Tom will hoot at you if you don't, whispered the inconvenient little voice that is always goading people to the performance of disagreeable duties and always appeals to the most effective agent to produce the proper result. The idea of allowing any boy that ever wore a felt basin and a shoddy jacket with a microscopic tail to crow over me was preposterous, so giving myself a mental slap for such faint-heartedness, I streamed away across the common, wondering if I ought to say, "Your Honor," or simply, "Sir," and decided upon the latter, fortifying myself with recollections of an evening in a charming green library where I beheld the governor placidly consuming oysters and laughing as if Massachusetts was a myth and he had no heavier burden on his shoulders than his host's handsome hands. Like an energetic fly in a large cobweb, I struggled through the State House, getting into all the wrong rooms and none of the right, till I turned desperate and went into one, resolving not to come out till I'd made somebody hear and answer me. I suspect that all the wrong places I had blundered into, this was the most so. But I didn't care, and though the apartment was full of soldiers and surgeons, starters and spittoons, I cornered a perfectly incapable person and proceeded to pump for information with the following result. Was the governor anywhere about? No, he wasn't. Could he tell me where to look? No, he couldn't. Did he know anything about free passes? No, he didn't. Was there anyone there of whom I could inquire? Not a person. Did he know of any place where information could be obtained? Not a place. Could he throw the smallest gleam of light upon the matter in any way? Not a ray. I am naturally irascible, and if I could have shaken this negative gentleman vigorously, the relief would have been immense. The prejudices of society forbidding this mode of redress, I merely glowered at him, and, before my wrath found vent in words, my general appeared, having seen me from an opposite window, and come to know what I was about. At her command, the languid gentleman woke up, and troubled himself to remember that Major, or Sergeant, or something, Mackay, knew all about the tickets, and his office was in Milk Street. I perked up insolenter, and then, as if the exertion was too much for him, what did this animated wet blanket do but add, "I think Mackay may have left Milk Street now, and I don't know where he has gone." Never mind, the newcomers will know where he has moved to, my dear, so don't be discouraged, and if you don't succeed, come to me, and we will see what to do next, said my general. I blessed her in a fervent manner, and a cool hall fluttered round the corner and bore down upon Milk Street, bent on discovering Mackay, if such a being was to be found. He wasn't, and the ignorance of the neighborhood was really pitiable. Nobody knew anything, and after tumbling over bundles of leather, bumping against big boxes, being nearly annihilated by descending bales, and sworn at by aggravated truckmen, I finally elicited the advice to look for Mackay in Haymarket Square. Who my informant was, I've really forgotten, for, having hailed several busy gentlemen, some one of them fabricated this delusive quietus for the perturbed spirit, who instantly departed to the sequestered locality he named. If I had been in search of the Koh-i-Noor diamond, I should have been as likely to find it there as any vestige of Mackay. I stared at signs, inquired in shops, invaded an eating house, visited the recruiting tent in the middle of the square, made myself a nuisance generally, and accumulated mud enough to retard another Nile. All in vain, and I mournfully turned my face toward the generals, feeling that I should be forced to enrich the railroad company after all, when suddenly I beheld that admirable young man, brother-in-law, Darby Coobiddy, Esquire. I arrested him with a burst of news and wants and woes which caused his manly countenance to lose its usual repose. "Oh, my dear boy, I'm going to Washington at 5, and I can't find the free ticket man, and there won't be time to see Joan, and I'm so tired and cross, I don't know what to do, and will you help me like a cherub as you are?" "Oh, yes, of course. I know a fellow who will set us right," responded Darby, mildly excited, and darting into some kind of an office, held counsel with an invisible angel, who sent him out radiant. "All serene. I've got him. I'll see you through the business, and then get Joan from the Dovecote in time to see you off. I'm a woman's rights woman, and if any man had offered help in the morning, I should have condescendingly refused it, sure that I could do everything as well, if not better, myself. My strong-mindedness had rather abated since then, and I was now quite ready to be a timid trembler, if necessary. Dear me, how easily Darby did it all. He just asked one question, received an answer, tucked me under his arm, and in 10 minutes I stood in the presence of Mackay the Desired. Now my troubles are over, thought I, and as usual was direfully mistaken. You will have to get a pass from Dr. H. in Temple Place before I can give you a pass, madam, answered Mackay as blandly as if he wasn't carrying desolation to my soul. Oh, indeed, why didn't he send me to Dorchester Heights, India Wharf, or Bunker Hill Monument, and done with it? Here I was, after a morning's tramp, down in some place about Dock Square, and was told to step to Temple Place. Nor was that all. He might as well have asked me to catch a hummingbird, toast a salamander, or call on the man in the moon, as find a doctor at home at the busiest hour of the day. It was a blow, but weariness had extinguished enthusiasm, and resignation clothed me as a garment. I sent Darby for Joan, and doggedly paddled off, feeling that mud was my native element, and quite sure that the evening papers would announce the appearance of a wandering Jew in feminine habiliments. Is Dr. H. in? No, Mum, he ain't. Of course he wasn't. I knew that before I asked, and considering it all in the light of a hollow mockery, added, When will he probably return? If the damsel had said 10 tonight, I should have felt a grim satisfaction in the fulfillment of my own dark prophecy, but she said, At 2, Mum, and I felt it a personal insult. I'll call them, tell him my business is important. With which mysteriously delivered message I departed, hoping that I left her consumed with curiosity, for mud rendered me an object of interest. By the way of resting myself, I crossed the common for the 3rd time, bespoke the carriage, got some lunch, packed my purchases, smoothed my plumage, and was back again as the clock struck 2. The doctor hadn't come yet, and I was morally certain that he would not till, having waited till the last minute, I was driven to buy a ticket, and 5 minutes after the irrevocable deed was done, he would be at my service with all manner of helpful documents and directions. Everything goes by contraries with me, so, having made up my mind to be disappointed, of course I wasn't, for presently in walked Dr. H., and no sooner had he heard my errand and glanced at my credentials that he said with the most engaging readiness, I will give you the order with pleasure, madam. Words cannot express how soothing and delightful it was to find at last somebody who could do what I wanted without sending me from Dan to Beersheba for a dozen other to do something else first. Peace descended like oil upon the ruffled waters of my being as I sat listening to the busy scratch of his pen, and when he turned about, giving me not only the order but a paper of directions wherewith to smooth away all difficulties between Boston and Washington, I felt as did poor Christian when the evangelist gave him the scroll on the safe side of the slough of despond. I've no doubt many dismal nurses have inflicted themselves upon the worthy gentleman since then, but I am sure none have been more kindly helped or are more grateful than TP, for that short interview added another to the many pleasant associations that already surround his name. Feeling myself no longer a Martha Struggles, but a comfortable young woman with plain sailing before her and the worst of the voyage well over, I once more presented myself to the valuable Mackay. The order was read, and certain printed papers necessary to be filled out were given a young gentleman, no, I prefer to say boy, with a scornful emphasis upon the word, as the only means of revenge now left me. This boy, instead of doing his duty with the diligence so charming in the young, loitered and lounged in a manner which proved his education to have been sadly neglected in the how doth the little busy bee direction. He stared at me, gaped out of the window, ate peanuts, and gossiped with his neighbors, boys like himself, and all penned in a row like colts in a cattle show. I don't imagine he knew the anguish he was inflicting, for it was nearly 3, the train left at 5, and I had my ticket to get, my dinner to eat, my blessed sister to see, and the depot to reach if I didn't die of apoplexy. Meanwhile, Patience certainly had her perfect work that day, and I hoped she enjoyed the job more than I did. Having waited some 20 minutes, it pleased this reprehensible boy to make various marks and blots on my documents, toss them to a venerable creature of 16, who delivered them to me with such paternal directions that it only needed a pat on the head and an encouraging, "Now run home to your ma, little girl, and mind the crossings, my dear," to make the illusion quite perfect. Why I was sent to a steamboat office for car tickets is not for me to say, though I went as meekly as I should have gone to the probate court if sent. A fat, easy gentleman gave me several bits of paper with coupons attached, with a warning not to separate them, which instantly inspired me with a yearning to pluck them apart and see what came of it. But remembering through what fear and tribulation I had obtained them, I curbed Satan's promisings, and clutching my prize as if it were my pass to the Elysian fields, I hurried home. Dinner was rapidly consumed. Joan, enlightened, comforted, and kissed, the dearest of apple-faced cousins, hugged, the kindest of apple-faced cousins' fathers, subjected to the same process, and I mounted the ambulance, baggage wagon, or anything you please but hack, and drove away too tired to feel excited, sorry, or glad. Chapter 2. A Forward Movement. As travelers like to give their own impressions of a journey, though every inch of the way may have been described a half a dozen times before, I add some of the notes made by the way, hoping that they will amuse the reader and convince the skeptical that such a being as Nurse Periwinkle does exist, that she really did go to Washington, and that these sketches are not romance. New York train, 7 p.m. Spinning along to take the boat at New London. Very comfortable, much gingerbread, and Mrs. C's fine pear, which deserves honorable mention because my first loneliness was comforted by it, and pleasant recollections of both kindly sender and bearer. Look much at Dr. H.'s paper of directions, put my tickets in every conceivable place that they may be get-atable, and finish by losing them entirely. Suffer agonies till a compassionate neighbor pokes them out of a crack with his penknife. Put them in the inmost corner of my purse, that in the deepest recesses of my pocket pile a collection of miscellaneous articles atop, and pin up the whole. Just get composed, feeling that I've done my best to keep them safely, when the conductor appears, and I'm forced to rout them all out again, exposing my precautions, and getting into a flutter at keeping the man waiting. Finally, fasten them on the seat before me, and keep one eye steadily upon the yellow torments, till I forget all about them in chat with the gentleman who shares my seat. Having heard complaints of the absurd way in which American women become images of petrified propriety if addressed by strangers when traveling alone, the inborn perversity of my nature causes me to assume an entirely opposite style of deportment, and finding my companion hails from Little Athens, is acquainted with several of my 365 cousins, and in every way a respectable and respectful member of society, I put my bashfulness in my pocket and plunge into a long conversation on the war, the weather, music, Carlyle, skating, genius, hoops, and the immortality of the soul. 10 p.m. Very sleepy. Nothing to be seen outside but darkness made visible, nothing inside but every variety of bunch into which the human form can be twisted, rolled, or massed, as Miss Prescott says of her jewels. Every man's legs sprawl drowsily, every woman's head, but mine, nods, till it finally settles on somebody's shoulder, a new proof of the truth that the everlasting oak and vine simile, children fret, lovers whisper, old folks snore, and somebody privately imbibes brandy when the lamps go out. The penetrating perfume rouses the multitude, causing some to start up like war horses at the smell of powder. When the lamps are relighted, everyone laughs, sniffs, and looks inquiringly at his neighbor, everyone but a stout gentleman who, with well-gloved hands folded upon his broadcloth rotundity, sleeps on impressively. Had he been innocent, he would have waked up, for to slumber in that babe-like manner with a car full of giggling, staring, sniffing humanity was simply preposterous. Public suspicion was down upon him at once. I doubt if the appearance of a flat black bottle with a label would have settled the matter more effectually than did the over-dignified and profound repose of this short-sighted being. His moral neckcloth, virtuous boots, and pious attitude availed him nothing, and it was well he kept his eyes shut, for humbug twinkled at him from every window-pane, brass nail, and human eye around him. 11 p.m. In the boat, City of Boston, escorted thither by my car acquaintance and deposited in the cabin. Trying to look as if the greater portion of my life had been passed on board boats, but painfully conscious that I don't know the first thing, so sit bolt upright and stare about me till I hear one lady say to another, "We must secure our berths at once." Whereupon I dart at one, and while leisurely taking off my cloak, wait to discover what the second move may be. Several ladies draw the curtains that hang in a semicircle before each nest. Instantly I whisk mine smartly together, and then peep out to see what next. Gradually, on hooks above the blue and yellow drapery, appear the coats and bonnets of my neighbors, while their boots and shoes in every imaginable attitude assert themselves below as if their owners had committed suicide in a body. A violent creaking, scrambling, and fussing causes the fact that people are going regularly to bed to dawn upon my mind. Of course they are, and so am I, but pause at the seventh pin, remembering that, as I was born to be drowned, an eligible opportunity now presents itself, and, having twice escaped a watery grave, the third immersion will certainly extinguish my vital spark. The boat is new, but if it ever intends to blow up, spring a leak, catch a fire, or be run into, it will do the deed tonight, because I'm here to fulfill my destiny. With tragic calmness, I resign myself, replace my pins, lash my purse and papers together with my handkerchief, examine the saving circumference of my hoop, and look about me for any means of deliverance, when the moist moment shall arrive, for I've no intention of folding my hands and bubbling to death without an energetic splashing first. Barrels, hen coops, portable settees, and life-preservers do not adorn the cabin, as they should, and, roving wildly to and fro, my eye sees no ray of hope till it falls upon a plump old lady devoutly reading in the cabin Bible and a voluminous nightcap. I remember that, at the swimming school, fat girls always floated best, and in an instant my plan was laid. At the first alarm, I firmly attach myself to the plump lady and cling to her through fire and water, for I feel that my old enemy, the cramp, will seize me by the foot if I attempt to swim, and though I can hardly expect to reach Jersey City with myself and my baggage in as good condition as I hoped, I might manage to get picked up by holding to my fat friend. If not, it will be a comfort to feel that I've made an effort and shall die in good society. Poor dear woman, how little she dreamed, as she read and rocked with her cap in a high state of starch, and her feet comfortably cooking at the register, what fell designs were hovering about her, and how intently a small but determined eye watched her till it suddenly closed. Sleep got the better of fear to such an extent that my boots appeared to gape, and my bonnet nodded on its peg before I gave in. Having piled my cloak, bag, rubbers, boots, and umbrella on the lower shelf, I drowsily swarmed onto the upper one, tumbling down a few times and excoriating the knobby portions of my frame in the act. A very brief nap on the upper roost was enough to set me gasping, as if a dozen featherbeds and a whole boat were laid over me. Out I turned, and after a series of convulsions, which caused my neighbor to ask if I wanted the stewardess, I managed to get my luggage up and myself down. But even in the lower berth, my rest was not unbroken, for various articles kept dropping off a little shelf at the bottom of the bed, and every time I flew up, thinking my hour had come, I bumped my head severely against the little shelf at the top, evidently put there for that express purpose. At last, after listening to the swash of the waves outside, wondering if the machinery usually creaked in that way, and watching a knothole in the side of my berth, sure that death would creep in there as soon as I took my eye from it, I dropped asleep and dreamed of muffins. 5 a.m. On deck, trying to wake up and enjoy an east wind, and a morning fog, and a twilight sort of view of something on the shore. Rapidly achieve my purpose, and do enjoy every moment as we go rushing through the Sound, with steamboats passing up and down, lights dancing on the shore, mist wreaths slowly furling off, and a pale pink sky above us as the sun comes up. 7 a.m. in the cars at Jersey City. Much fuss with tickets, which one man scribbles over, another snips, and a third makes note on. Partake of refreshment in the gloom of a very large and dirty depot. Think that my sandwiches would be more relishing without so strong a flavor of napkin, and my gingerbread more easy of consumption if it had not been pulverized by being sat upon. People act as if early traveling didn't agree with them. Children scream and scamper, men smoke and growl, women shiver and fret, porters swear, great truck horses pace up and down with loads of baggage, and everyone seems to get into the wrong car and come tumbling out again. One man, with 3 children, a dog, a birdcage, and several bundles, puts himself and his possessions into every possible place where a man, 3 children, dog, birdcage, and bundles could be got, and is satisfied with none of them. I follow their movements with an interest that is really exhausting, and as they vanish, hope for rest, but don't get it. A strong-minded woman with a tumbler in her hand and no cloak or shawl on comes rushing through the car, talking loudly to a small porter who lugs a folding bed after her and looks as if life were a burden to him. "You promised to have it ready. It is not ready. It must be a car with a water jug. The windows must be shut. The fire must be kept up. The blinds must be down. No, this won't do. I shall go through the whole train and suit myself, for you promised to have it ready." It is not ready, and see, all through again like a hand organ. She haunted the cars, the depot, the office, and baggage room, with her bed, her tumbler, and her tongue, till the train started, and a sense of fervent gratitude filled my soul, when I found that she and her unknown invalid were not to share our car. Philadelphia. An old place full of Dutch women in Bella's top bonnets, selling vegetables in long, open markets. Everyone seems to be scrubbing their white steps. All the houses look like tidy jails with their outside shutters. Several have crepe on the door handles, and many have flags flying from roof or balcony. Few men appear, and the women seem to do all the business, which perhaps accounts for its being so well done. Pass fine buildings, but don't know what they are. Would like to stop and see my native city, for, having left it at the tender age of 2, my recollections are not vivid. Baltimore. A big, dirty, shippy, shiftless place full of goats, geese, colored people, and coal, at least the part of it I see. Pass near the spot where the riot took place, and feel as if I should enjoy throwing a stone at somebody hard. Find a guard at the ferry, the depot, and here and there along the road. A camp whitens one hillside, and a cavalry training school, or whatever it should be called, is a very interesting sight, with quantities of horses and riders galloping, marching, leaping, and skirmishing over all manner of breakneck places. A party of English people get in, the men, with sandy hair and red whiskers, all trimmed alike to a hair, rough gray coats, very rosy, clean faces, and a fine, full way of speaking, which is particularly agreeable after our slipshod American gabble. The 2 ladies wear funny velvet fur-trimmed hoods, are done up like compact bundles in tartan shawls, and look as if bent on seeing everything thoroughly. The devotion of one elderly John Bull to his red-nosed spouse was really beautiful to behold. She was plain and cross and fussy and stupid, but J.B. Esquire read no papers when she was awake, turned no cold shoulder when she wished to sleep, and cheerfully said, "Yes, me dear," to every wish or want the wife of his bosom expressed. I quite warmed to the excellent man, and asked a question or two as the only means of expressing my goodwill. He answered very civilly, but evidently hadn't been used to being addressed by strange women in public conveyances, and Mrs. B. fixed her green eyes upon me as if she thought me a forward hussy, or whatever is good English for a presuming young woman. The pair left their friends before we reached Washington, and the last I saw of them was a vision of a large plaid lady stalking grimly away on the arm of a rosy stout gentleman, loaded with rugs, bags, and books, but still devoted, still smiling, and waving a hearty "Fare ye well! We'll meet ye at Willard's on Tuesday." Soon after their departure, we had an accident, for no long journey in America would be complete without one. A coupling iron broke, and after leaving the last car behind us, we waited for it to come up, which it did with a crash that knocked everyone forward on their faces and caused several old ladies to screech dismally. Hats flew off, bonnets were flattened, the stove skipped, the lamps fell down, the water jar turned a somersault, and the wheel just over which I sat received some damage. Of course, it became necessary for all the men to get out and stand about in everybody's way, while repairs were made, and for the women to wrestle their heads out of the windows, asking 99 foolish questions to one sensible one. A few wise females seized this favorable moment to better their seats, well knowing that few men can face the wooden stare with which they regard the former possessors of the places they have invaded. The country through which we passed did not seem so very unlike that which I had left, except that it was more level and less wintry. In summertime, the wide fields would have shown me new sights, and the wayside hedges blossomed with new flowers now. Everything was sere and sodden, and a general air of shiftlessness prevailed, which would have caused a New England farmer much disgust, and a strong desire to buckle to and right up things. Dreary little houses with chimneys built outside, with clay and rough sticks piled crosswise, as we used to build cob towers, stood in barren-looking fields, with cow, pig, or mule lounging about the door. We often passed colored people, looking as if they had come out of a picture book or off the stage, but not at all the sort of people I'd been accustomed to see at the North. Wayside encampments made the fields and lanes gay with blue coats and the glitter of buttons. Military washes flapped and fluttered on the fences, pots were steaming in the open air, all sorts of tableaux seen through the openings of tents, and everywhere the boys threw up their caps and cut capers as we passed. Washington. It was dark when we arrived, and, but for the presence of another friendly gentleman, I should have yielded myself a helpless prey to the first overpowering hackman who insisted that I wanted to go just where I didn't. Putting me into the conveyance I belonged in, my escort added to the obligation by pointing out the objects of interest which we passed in our long drive. Though I'd often been told that Washington was a spacious place, its visible magnitude quite took my breath away, and of course I quoted Randolph's expression, a city of magnificent distances, as I suppose everyone does when they see it. The Capitol was so like the pictures that hang opposite the staring Father of his Country in boarding houses and hotels that it did not impress me except to recall the time when I was sure that Cinderella went to housekeeping in just such a place after she had married the inflammable prince, though even at that early period I had my doubts as to the wisdom of a match whose foundation was of glass. The White House was lighted up and carriages were rolling in and out of the great gate. I stared hard at the famous East Room and would have liked to peep through the crack of the door. My old gentleman was indefatigable in his attentions, and I said "splendid" to everything he pointed out, though I suspect I often admired the wrong place and missed the right. Pennsylvania Avenue, with its bustle, lights, music, and military, made me feel as if I'd crossed the water and landed somewhere in carnival time. Coming to less notable parts of the city, my companion fell silent, and I meditated upon the perfection which art had attained in America, having just passed a bronze statue of some hero who looked like a black Methodist minister in a cocked hat above the waist and a tipsy squire below, while his horse stood like an opera dancer on one leg in a high but somewhat remarkable wind, which blew his mane one way and his massive tail the other. "Hurly-burly house, ma'am," called a voice, startling me from my reverie as we stopped before a great pile of buildings, with a flag flying before it, sentinels at the door, and a very trying quantity of men lounging about. My heart beat rather faster than usual, and it suddenly struck me that I was very far from home. But I descended with dignity, wondering whether I should be stopped for want of a countersign and forced to pass the night in the street. Marching boldly up the steps, I found that no form was necessary, for the men fell back, the guard touched their caps, a boy opened the door, and, as it closed behind me, I felt that I was fairly started, and Nurse Periwinkle's mission was begun. Chapter 3. A Day. They've come! Hurry up, ladies, you're wanted. Who have come? The rebels? This sudden summons in the gray dawn was somewhat startling to a 3-days nurse like myself, and as the thundering knock came at our door, I sprang up in my bed, prepared to gird my woman's form and on the ramparts die, if necessary. But my roommate took it more coolly, and, as she began a rapid toilet, answered my bewildered question. "Bless you, no, child. It's the wounded from Fredericksburg. 40 ambulances are at the door, and we shall have our hands full in 15 minutes. What shall we have to do? Wash, dress, feed, warm, and nurse them for the next 3 months, I dare say. 80 beds are ready, and we were getting impatient for the men to come. Now you will begin to see hospital life in earnest, for you won't probably find time to sit down all day, and may think yourself fortunate if you get to bed by midnight. Come to me in the ballroom when you are ready. The worst cases are always carried there, and I shall need your help." So saying, the energetic little woman twirled her hair into a button at the back of her head in a cleared-for-action sort of style, and vanished, rustling her way into a feminine kind of pea-jacket as she went. I am free to confess that I had a realizing sense of the fact that my hospital bed was not a bed of roses just then, or the prospect before me one of unmingled rapture. My 3 days' experiences had begun with a death, and owing to the defalcation of another nurse, a somewhat abrupt plunge into the superintendence of a ward containing 40 beds, where I spent my shining hours washing faces, serving rations, giving medicine, and sitting in a very hard chair, with pneumonia on one side, diphtheria on the other, 5 typhoids on the opposite, and a dozen dilapidated patriots hopping, lying, and lounging about, all staring more or less at the new nurse, who suffered untold agonies, but concealed them under as matronly an aspect as a spinster could assume, and blundered through her trying labors with a Spartan firmness, which I hope they appreciated, but am afraid they didn't. Having a taste for ghastliness, I had rather longed for the wounded to arrive, for rheumatism wasn't heroic, neither was liver complaint or measles. Even fever had lost its charms, since bathing burning brows had been used up in romances, real and ideal. But when I peeped into the dusky street lined with what I at first had innocently called market carts now unloading their sad freight at our door, I recalled sundry reminiscences I had heard from nurses of longer standing. My ardor experienced a sudden chill, and I indulged in a most unpatriotic wish that I was safe at home again, with a quiet day before me and no necessity for being hustled up, as if I were a hen and had only to hop off my roost, give my plumage a peck, and be ready for action. A second bang at the door sent this recreant desire to the right about, and a little woolly head popped in, and Joey, a 6 years old contraband, announced, "Miss Blanks is just wild for you, and says fly around right away. They's come in, I tell you, heaps on 'em. One was took out dead, and I seen 'em high. Warn't he a goner?" With which cheerful intelligence the imp scuttled away, singing like a blackbird, and I followed, feeling that Richard was not himself again, and wouldn't be for a long time to come. The first thing I met was a regiment of the vilest odors that ever assaulted the human nose, and took it by storm. Cologne, with its 77 evil savors, was a posy bed to it, and the worst of this affliction was, every one had assured me that it was a chronic weakness of all hospitals, and I must bear it. I did, armed with lavender water, with which I so besprinkled myself and premises that, like my friend Sari, I was soon known among my patients as the nurse with the bottle. Having been run over by 3 excited surgeons, bumped against by migratory coal hods, water pails, and small boys, nearly scalded by an avalanche of newly filled teapots, and hopelessly entangled in a knot of colored sisters coming to wash, I progressed by slow stages upstairs and down till the main hall was reached, and I paused to take breath and a survey. There they were, our brave boys, as the papers justly call them, for cowards could hardly have been so riddled with shot and shell, so torn and shattered, nor have borne suffering for which we have no name, with an uncomplaining fortitude, which made one glad to cherish each as a brother. In they came, some on stretchers, some in men's arms, some feebly staggering along, propped on rude crutches, and one lay stark and still, with covered face, as a comrade gave his name to be recorded before they carried him away to the dead house. All was hurry and confusion. The hall was full of these wrecks of humanity, for the most exhausted could not reach a bed till duly ticketed and registered. The walls were lined with rows of such as could sit, the floor covered with the more disabled, the steps and doorways filled with helpers and lookers-on. The sound of many feet and voices made that usually quiet hour as noisy as noon, and in the midst of it all, the matron's motherly face brought more comfort to many a poor soul than the cordial draughts she administered, or the cheery words that welcomed all, making of the hospital a home. The sight of several stretchers, each with its legless, armless, or desperately wounded occupant entering my ward, admonished me that I was there to work, not to wander or weep, so I corked up my feelings and returned to the path of duty, which was rather a hard road to travel just then. The house had been a hotel before hospitals were needed, and many of the doors still bore their old names, some not so inappropriate as might be imagined, for my ward was in truth a ballroom, if gunshot wounds could christen it. 40 beds were prepared, many already tenanted by tired men who fell down anywhere and drowsed till the smell of food roused them. Round the great stove was gathered the dreariest group I ever saw, ragged, gaunt, and pale, mud to the knees, with bloody bandages untouched since put on days before, many bundled up in blankets, coats being lost or useless, and all wearing that disheartened look which proclaimed defeat, more plainly than any telegram of the Burnside blunder. I pitied them so much, I dared not speak to them, though, remembering all they had been through since the rout at Fredericksburg, I yearned to serve the dreariest of them all. Presently, Miss Blank tore me from my refuge behind piles of one-sleeved shirts, odd socks, bandages, and lint, put basin, sponge, towels, and a block of brown soap into my hands with these appalling directions. Come, my dear, begin to wash as fast as you can. Tell them to take off socks, coats, and shirts, scrub them well, put on clean shirts, and the attendants will finish them off and lay them in bed. If she had requested me to shave them all, or dance a hornpipe on the stove funnel, I should have been less staggered, but to scrub some dozen lords of creation at a moment's notice was really... However, there was no time for nonsense, and having resolved when I came to do everything I was bid, I drowned my scruples in my washbowl, clutched my soap manfully, and assuming a businesslike air, made a dab at the very first dirty specimen I saw, bent on performing my task viat armis if necessary. I chanced to light on a withered old Irishman, wounded in the head, which caused that portion of his frame to be tastefully laid out like a garden, the bandages being the walks, his hair the shrubbery. He was so overpowered by the honor of having a lady wash him, as he expressed it, that he did nothing but roll up his eyes and bless me in an irresistible style, which was too much for my sense of the ludicrous, so we laughed together, and when I knelt down to take off his shoes, he flopped also, and wouldn't hear of my touching them dirty craters. May your bed above be aisy, darling, for the day's work y'are doing. Whoosh, there you are, and bedad, it's hard telling which is the dirtiest, the foot or the shoe. It was, and if he hadn't been to the fore, I should have gone on pulling under the impression that the foot was a boot, for trousers, socks, shoes, and legs were a mass of mud. This comical tableau produced a general grin, at which propitious beginning I took heart and scrubbed away like any tidy parent on a Saturday night. Some of them took the performance like sleepy children, leaning their tired heads against me as I worked. Others looked grimly scandalized, and several of the roughest colored like bashful girls. One wore a soiled little bag about his neck, and, as I moved it to bathe his wounded breast, I said, "Your talisman didn't save you, did it?" "Well, I reckon it did, marm, for that shot would have gone a couple inches deeper, but for my old mammy's camphor bag," answered the cheerful philosopher. Another, with a gunshot wound through the cheek, asked for a looking-glass, and when I brought one, regarded his swollen face with a dolorous expression as he muttered, "Ah, vow to gosh, that's too bad. I weren't a bad-looking chap before, and now I'm done for. Won't there be a thunderin' scar? And what on earth will Josephine Skinner say?" He looked up at me with his one eye so appealingly that I controlled my risibles, and assured him that if Josephine was a girl of sense, she would admire the honorable scar as a lasting proof that he had faced the enemy, for all women thought a wound the best decoration a brave soldier could wear. I hope Miss Skinner verified the good opinion I so rashly expressed of her, but I shall never know. The next scrubby was a nice-looking lad with a curly brown mane and a budding trace of gingerbread over the lip, which he called his beard and defended stoutly when the barber jocosely suggested its immolation. He lay on a bed with one leg gone, and the right arm so shattered that it must evidently follow. Yet the little sergeant was as merry as if his afflictions were not worth lamenting over, and when a drop or two of salt water mingled with my suds at the sight of this strong young body so marred and maimed, the boy looked up with a brave smile, though there was a little quiver of the lips as he said, "Now don't you fret yourself about me, miss. I'm first-rate here, for it's nuts to lie still on this bed after knocking about in those confounded ambulances that shake what there is left of a fellow to jelly. I never was in one of these places before, and thinking this cleaning up a jolly thing for us, though I'm afraid it isn't for you ladies." "Is this your first battle, Sergeant?" "No, miss. I've been in 6 scrimmages and never got a scratch till this last one, but it's done the business pretty thoroughly for me, I should say. Lord, what a scramble there'll be for arms and legs when we old boys come out of our graves on the Judgment Day. Wonder if we shall get our own again. If we do, my leg will have to tramp from Fredericksburg, my arm from here, I suppose, and meet my body wherever it may be." The fancy seemed to tickle him mightily, for he laughed blithely, and so did I, which no doubt caused the new nurse to be regarded as a light-minded sinner by the chaplain, who roamed vaguely about, informing the men that they were all worms, corrupt of heart and perishable bodies, and souls only to be saved by a diligent perusal of certain tracts and other equally cheering bits of spiritual consolation, when spiritus ditto would have been preferred. "I say, miss," called a voice behind me, and turning, I saw a rough Michigander with an arm blown off at the shoulder and 2 or 3 bullets still in him, as he afterwards mentioned as carelessly as if gentlemen were in the habit of carrying such trifles about with them. I went to him, and, while administering a dose of soap and water, he whispered irefully, "That red-headed devil over yonder is a Reb, damn him. You'll agree to that, I bet? He's got shed of a foot, and he'd a cut like the rest of the lot. Don't you wash him nor feed him, but just let him holler till he's tired. It's a blasted shame to fetch these fellows in here alongside of us, and so I'll tell the chap that bosses this concern, cuss me if I don't." I regret to say that I did not deliver a moral sermon upon the duty of forgiving our enemies and the sin of profanity then and there, but, being a red-hot abolitionist, stared fixedly at the tall rebel who was a copperhead, in every sense of the word, and privately resolved to put soap in his eyes, rub his nose the wrong way, and excoriate his cuticle generally, if I had the washing of him. My amiable intentions, however, were frustrated, for when I approached with as Christian an expression as my principles would allow, and asked the question, "Shall I try to make you more comfortable, sir?" all I got for my pains was a gruff, "No, I'll do it myself." Here's your southern chivalry with a witness, thought I, dumping the basin down before him, thereby quenching a strong desire to give him a summary baptism in return for his ungraciousness, for my angry passions rose at this rebuff in a way that would have scandalized good Dr. Watts. He was a disappointment in all respects, the rebel, not the blessed doctor, for he was neither fiendish, romantic, pathetic, or anything interesting, but a long, fat man with a head like a burning bush and a perfectly expressionless face, so I could dislike him without the slightest drawback, and ignored his existence from that day forth. One redeeming trait he certainly did possess, as the floor speedily testified, for his ablutions were so vigorously performed that his bed soon stood like an isolated island in a sea of soap suds, and he resembled a dripping merman suffering from the loss of a fin. If cleanliness is a near neighbor to godliness, then was the big rebel the godliest man in my ward that day. Having done up our human wash and laid it out to dry, the second syllable of our version of the word warfare was enacted with much success. Great trays of bread, meat, soup, and coffee appeared, and both nurses and attendants turned waiters, serving bountiful rations to all who could eat. I can call my pinafore to testify to my goodwill in the work, for in 10 minutes it was reduced to a perambulating bill of fare, presenting samples of all the refreshments going or gone. It was a lively scene, the long room lined with rows of beds, each filled by an occupant whom water, shears, and cleaned raiment had transformed from a dismal ragamuffin into a recumbent hero with a cropped head. To and fro rushed matrons, maids, and convalescent boys, skirmishing with knives and forks, retreating with empty plates, marching and countermarching with unvaried success, while the clash of busy spoons made most inspiring music for the charge of our light brigade. Beds to the front of them, beds to the right of them, beds to the left of them, nobody blundered. Beamed at by hungry souls, screamed at with brimming bowls, steamed at by army rolls, buttered and sundered, with coffee not cannon plied. Each must be satisfied, whether they lived or died. All the men wondered. Very welcome seemed the generous meal after a week of suffering, exposure, and short commons. Soon the brown faces began to smile as food, warmth, and rest did their pleasant work, and the grateful thankees were followed by more graphic accounts of the battle and retreat than any paid reporter could have given us. Curious contrasts of the tragic and comic met one everywhere, and some touching as well as ludicrous episodes might have been recorded that day. A 6-foot New Hampshire man with a leg broken and perforated by a piece of shell so large that, had I not seen the wound, I should have regarded the story as a Munchausenism, beckoned me to come and help him, as he could not sit up, and both his bed and beard were getting plentifully anointed with soup. As I fed my big nestling with corresponding mouthfuls, I asked him how he felt during the battle. "Well, 'twas my first, you see, so I ain't ashamed to say that I was a trifle flustered in the beginning. There was such an all-fired racket, for if there's anything, I do spleen agin its noise. But when my mate F. Sylvester caved with a bullet through his head, I got mad and pitched in lickety-cut. Our part of the fight didn't last long, so a lot of us larked round Fredericksburg and give some of them houses a pretty considerable of a rummage till we was ordered out of the mess. Some of our fellows cut like time, but I weren't a-goin' to run for nobody, and first thing I knew, a shell bust right in front of us, and I keeled over feeling as if I was blowing higher than a kite. I sung out, and the boys came back for me double quick, but the way they chucked me over the fences was a caution, I tell you. Next day I was most as black as that darky yonder licking plates on the sly. This is bully coffee, ain't it? Give us another pull at it, and I'll be obleeged to you." I did, and as the last gulp subsided, he said with a rub of his old handkerchief over eyes as well as mouth, "Looky here, I got a pair of ear bobs and a handkercher pin I'm a-goin' to give you if you'll have 'em. For you're the very moral o' Lizzie Sylvester, poor F's wife. That's why I signaled you to come over here. They ain't much, I guess, but they'll do to memorize the rebs by." Burrowing under his pillow, he produced a little bundle of what he called truck, and gallantly presented me with a pair of earrings, each representing a cluster of corpulent grapes, and the pin a basket of astonishing fruit, the whole large and coppery enough for a small warming pan. Feeling delicate about depriving him of such valuable relics, I accepted the earrings alone, and was obliged to depart somewhat abruptly when my friend stuck the warming pan in the bosom of his nightgown, viewing it with much complacency and, perhaps, some tender memory in that rough heart of his for the comrade he had lost. Observing that the man next to him had left his meal untouched, I offered the same service I had performed for his neighbor, but he shook his head. "Thank you, ma'am. I don't think I'll ever eat again, for I'm shot in the stomach. But I'd like a drink of water, if you ain't too busy." I rushed away, but the water pails were gone to be refilled, and it was some time before they reappeared. I did not forget my patient meanwhile, and with the first mugful hurried back to him. He seemed asleep, but something in the tired white face caused me to listen at his lips for a breath. None came. I touched his forehead. It was cold, and then I knew that, while he waited, a better nurse than I had given him a cooler draught and healed him with a touch. I laid the sheet over the quiet sleeper, whom no noise could now disturb, and half an hour later the bed was empty. It seemed a poor requital for all he had sacrificed and suffered, that hospital bed, lonely even in a crowd, for there was no familiar face for him to look his last upon, no friendly voice to say good-bye, no hand to lead him gently down into the valley of the shadow, and he vanished like a drop in that Red Sea upon whose shores so many women stand lamenting. For a moment I felt bitterly indignant at this seeming carelessness of the value of life, the sanctity of death, then consoled myself with the thought that when the great muster roll was called, these nameless men might be promoted above many whose tall monuments record the barren honors they have won. All having eaten, drank, and rested, the surgeons began their rounds, and I took my first lesson in the art of dressing wounds. It wasn't a festive scene, by any means, for Dr. P., whose aid I constituted myself, fell to work with a vigor which soon convinced me that I was a weaker vessel, though nothing would have induced me to confess it then. He had served in the Crimea, and seemed to regard a dilapidated body very much as I should have regarded a damaged garment, and, turning up his cuffs, whipped out a very unpleasant-looking housewife, cutting, sawing, patching, and piecing, with the enthusiasm of an accomplished surgical seamstress, explaining the process in scientific terms to the patient, meanwhile, which of course was immensely cheering and comfortable. There was an uncanny sort of fascination in watching him as he peered and probed into the mechanism of those wonderful bodies whose mysteries he understood so well. The more intricate the wound, the better he liked it. A poor private with both legs off and shot through the lungs possessed more attractions for him than a dozen generals slightly scratched in some masterly retreat, and had anyone appeared in small pieces requesting to be put together again, he would have considered it a special dispensation. The amputations were reserved till the morrow, and the merciful magic of ether was not thought necessary that day, so the poor souls had to bear their pains as best they might. It is all very well to talk of the patience of woman, and far be it from me to pluck that feather from her cap, for, heavens knows, she isn't allowed to wear many. But the patient endurance of these men under trials of the flesh was truly wonderful. Their fortitude seemed contagious, and scarcely a cry escaped them, though I often longed to groan for them, when pride kept their white lips shut, while great drops stood upon their foreheads, and the bed shook with the irrepressible tremor of their tortured bodies. One or two Irishmen anathematized the doctors with the frankness of their nation, and ordered the Virgin to stand by them as if she had been the wedded Biddy, to whom they could administer the poker if she didn't. But, as a general thing, the work went on in silence, broken only by some quiet request for roller, instruments, or plaster, a sigh from the patient, or a sympathizing murmur from the nurse. It was long past noon before these repairs were even partially made, and, having got the bodies of my boys into something like order, the next task was to minister to their minds by writing letters to the anxious souls at home, answering questions, reading papers, taking possession of money and valuables, for the eighth commandment was reduced to a very fragmentary condition, both by the blacks and whites who ornamented our hospital with their presence. Pocketbooks, purses, miniatures, and watches were sealed up, labeled, and handed over to the matron till such times as the owners thereof were made ready to depart homeward or campward again. The letters, dictated to me and revised by me that afternoon, would have made an excellent chapter for some future history of the war, for, like that which Thackeray's Ensign Spooney wrote his mother just before Waterloo, they were full of affection, pluck, and bad spelling, nearly all giving lively accounts of the battle, and ending with a somewhat sudden plunge from patriotism to provender, desiring Marm, Marianne, or Aunt Peters to send along some pies, pickles, sweet stuff, and apples to Yorn in haste, Joe, Sam, or Ned, as the case might be. My little sergeant insisted on trying to scribble something with his left hand, and patiently accomplished some half-dozen lines of hieroglyphics, which he gave me to fold and direct with a boyish blush that rendered a glimpse of "My dearest Jane" unnecessary to assure me that the heroic lad had been more successful in the service of Commander-in-Chief Cupid than that of Jen. Mars and a charming little romance blossomed instanter in Nurse Periwinkle's romantic fancy, though no further confidences were made that day, for Sergeant fell asleep, and judging from his tranquil face visited his absent sweetheart in the pleasant land of dreams. At 5 o'clock a great bell rang, and the attendants flew, not to arms but to their trays, to bring up supper, when a second uproar announced that it was ready. The newcomers woke at the sound, and I presently discovered that it took a very bad wound to incapacitate the defenders of the faith for the consumption of their rations. The amount that some of them sequestered was amazing. But when I suggested the probability of a famine hereafter to the matron, that motherly lady cried out, "Bless their hearts, why shouldn't they eat? It's their only amusement, so fill every one, and if there's not enough ready tonight, I'll lend my share to the Lord by giving it to the boys." And whipping up her coffee pot and plate of toast, she gladdened the eyes and stomachs of 2 or 3 dissatisfied heroes by serving them with a liberal hand, and I haven't the slightest doubt that, having cast her bread upon the waters, it came back buttered, as another large-hearted old lady was wont to say. Then came the doctor's evening visit, the administration of medicines, washing feverish faces, smoothing tumbled beds, wetting wounds, singing lullabies, and preparations for the night. By 11, the last labor of love was done, the last good night spoken, and, if any needed a reward for that day's work, they surely received it in the silent eloquence of those long lines of faces, showing pale and peaceful in the shaded rooms as we quitted them, followed by grateful glances that lighted us to bed, where rest, the sweetest, made our pillows soft, while night and nature took our places, filling that great house of pain with the healing miracles of sleep and his diviner brother, death. Chapter 4. A Night. Being fond of the night side of nature, I was soon promoted to the post of night nurse, with every facility for indulging in my favorite pastime of owling. My colleague, a black-eyed widow, relieved me at dawn, we two taking care of the ward between us, like the immortal Sari and Betsy, turn and turn about. I usually found my boys in the jolliest state of mind their condition allowed, for it was a known fact that Nurse Periwinkle objected to blue devils, and entertained a belief that he who laughed most was surest of recovery. At the beginning of my reign, dumps and dismals prevailed. The nurses looked anxious and tired, the men gloomy or sad, and a general "hark from the tombs a doleful sound" style of conversation seemed to be the fashion, a state of things which caused one coming from a merry social New England town to feel as if she had got into an exhausted receiver, and the instinct of self-preservation, to say nothing of a philanthropic desire to serve the race, caused a speedy change in Ward Number 1. More flattering than the most gracefully turned compliment, more grateful than the most admiring glance, was the sight of those rows of faces, all strange to me a little while ago, now lighting up with smiles of welcome as I came among them, enjoying that moment heartily, with a womanly pride in their regard, a motherly affection for them all. The evenings were spent in reading aloud, writing letters, waiting on and amusing the men, going the rounds with Dr. P. as he made his second daily survey, dressing my dozen wounds afresh, giving last doses and making them cozy for the long hours to come, till the 9 o'clock bell rang, the gas was turned down, the day nurses went off duty, the night watch came on, and my nocturnal adventure began. My ward was now divided into 3 rooms, and, under favor of the matron, I had managed to sort out the patients in such a way that I had what I called my duty room, my pleasure room, and my pathetic room, and worked for each in a different way. One I visited armed with a dressing tray full of rollers, plasters, and pins, another with books, flowers, games, and gossip, a third with teapots, lullabies, consolation, and sometimes a shroud. Wherever the sickest or most helpless man chanced to be, there I held my watch, often visiting the other rooms to see that the general watchman of the ward did his duty by the fires, and the wounds, the latter, needing constant wetting. Not only on this account did I meander, but also to get fresher air than the close rooms afforded, for owing to the stupidity of that mysterious somebody who does all the damage in the world, the windows had been carefully nailed down above, and the lower sashes could only be raised in the mildest weather, for the men lay just below. I had suggested a summary smashing of a few panes here and there, when frequent appeals to headquarters had proved unavailing and daily orders to lazy attendants had come to nothing. No one seconded the motion, however, and the nails were far beyond my reach, for, though belonging to the sisterhood of ministering angels, I had no wings, and might as well have asked for Jacob's ladder as a pair of steps in that charitable chaos. One of the harmless ghosts who bore me company during the haunted hours was Dan, the watchman, whom I regarded with a certain awe, for, though so much together, I never fairly saw his face, and, but for his legs, should never have recognized him, as we seldom met by day. These legs were remarkable, as was his whole figure, for his body was short, rotund, and done up in a big jacket and muffler. His beard hid the lower part of his face, his hat brimmed the upper, and all I ever discovered was a pair of sleepy eyes and a very mild voice. But the legs, very long, very thin, very crooked and feeble, looking like gray sausages in their tight coverings, without a ray of peg-topishness about them, and finished off with a pair of expansive green cloth shoes, very like Chinese junks, with the sails down. This figure, gliding noiselessly about the dimly lighted rooms, was strongly suggestive of the spirit of a beer barrel mounted on corkscrews, haunting the old hotel in search of its lost mates, emptied and staved in long ago. Another goblin who frequently appeared to me was the attendant of the pathetic room, who, being a faithful soul, was often up to tend 2 or 3 men, weak and wandering as babies after the fever had gone. The amiable creature beguiled the watches of the night by brewing jorgums of a fearful beverage which he called coffee, and insisted on sharing with me, coming in with a great bowl of something like mud soup, scalding hot, guiltless of cream, rich in all-pervading flavor of molasses, scorch, and tin pot. Such an amount of goodwill and neighborly kindness also went into the mess that I never could find the heart to refuse, but always received it with thanks, sipped it with hypocritical relish, while he remained, and whipped it into the slop jar the instant he departed, thereby gratifying him, securing one rousing laugh in the doziest hour of the night, and no one was the worse for the transaction but the pigs. Whether they were cut off untimely in their sins or not, I carefully abstained from inquiring. It was a strange life, asleep half the day, exploring Washington the other half, and all night hovering like a massive cherubim in a red rigolette over the slumbering sons of man. I liked it, and found many things to amuse, instruct, and interest me. The snores alone were quite a study, varying from the mild sniff to the stentorian snort, which startled the echoes and hoisted the performer erect, to accuse his neighbor of the deed, magnanimously forgive him, and wrapping the drapery of his couch about him, lie down to vocal slumber. After listening for a week to this band of wind instruments, I indulged in the belief that I could recognize each by the snore alone, and was tempted to join the chorus by breaking out with John Brown's favorite hymn, "Blow ye the trumpet, blow." I would have given much to have possessed the art of sketching, for many of the faces became wonderfully interesting when unconscious. Some grew stern and grim. The men, evidently dreaming of war, as they gave orders, groaned over their wounds, or damned the rebels vigorously. Some grew sad and infinitely pathetic, as if the pain, borne silently all day, revenged itself by now betraying what the man's pride had concealed so well. Often the roughest grew young and pleasant when sleep smoothed the hard lines away, letting the real nature assert itself. Many almost seemed to speak, and I learned to know these men better by night than through any intercourse by day. Sometimes they disappointed me, for faces that looked merry and good in the light grew bad and sly when the shadows came, and though they made no confidences in words, I read their lives, leaving them to wonder at the change of manner this midnight magic wrought in their nurse. A few talked busily, one drummer boy sang sweetly, though no persuasions could win a note from him by day, and several depended on being told what they had talked of in the morning. Even my constitutionals in the chilly halls possessed a certain charm, for the house was never still. Sentinels tramped round it all night long, their muskets glittering in the wintry moonlight as they walked, or stood before the doors, straight and silent as figures of stone, causing one to conjure up romantic visions of guarded forts, sudden surprises, and daring deeds, for in these war times the humdrum life of Yankeedom had vanished, and the most prosaic feels some thrill of that excitement which stirs the nation's heart and makes its capital a camp of hospitals. Wandering up and down these lower halls, I often heard cries from above, steps hurrying to and fro, saw surgeons passing up, or men coming down carrying a stretcher, where lay a long white figure whose face was shrouded and whose fight was done. Sometimes I stopped to watch the passers in the street, the moonlight shining on the spire opposite, or the gleam of some vessel floating like a white-winged seagull down the broad Potomac, whose fullest flow can never wash away the red stain of the land. The night, whose events I have a fancy to record, opened with a little comedy and closed with a great tragedy, for a virtuous and useful life, untimely ended, is always tragic to those who see not as God sees. My headquarters were beside the bed of a New Jersey boy crazed by the horrors of that dreadful Saturday. A slight wound in the knee brought him here, but his mind had suffered more than his body. Some string of that delicate machine was overstrained, and for days had been reliving in imagination the scenes he could not forget, till his distress broke out in incoherent ravings, pitiful to hear. As I sat by him, endeavoring to soothe his poor distracted brain by the constant touch of wet hands over his hot forehead, he lay cheering his comrades on, hurrying them back, then counting them as they fell around him, often clutching my arm to drag me from the vicinity of a bursting shell, or covering up his head to screen himself from a shower of shot, his face brilliant with fever, his eyes restless, his head never still, every muscle strained and rigid, while an incessant stream of defiant shouts, whispered warnings, and broken laments poured from his lips with that forceful bewilderment which makes such wanderings so hard to overhear. It was past 11, and my patient was slowly wearying himself into fitful intervals of quietude, when in one of these pauses a curious sound arrested my attention. Looking over my shoulder, I saw a one-legged phantom hopping nimbly down the room, and going to meet it, recognized a certain Pennsylvania gentleman whose wound fever had taken a turn for the worse, and, depriving him of the few wits a drunken campaign had left him, set him literally tripping on the light, fantastic toe toward home, as he blandly informed me, touching the military cap, which formed a striking contrast to the severe simplicity of the rest of his decidedly undress uniform. When sane, the least movement produced a roar of pain or a volley of oaths, but the departure of reason seemed to have wrought an agreeable change both in the man and his manners, for, balancing himself on one leg, like a meditative stork, he plunged into an animated discussion of the war, the president, lager beer, and Enfield rifles, regardless of any suggestions of mine as to the propriety of returning to bed, lest he be court-martialed for desertion. Anything more supremely ridiculous can hardly be imagined than this figure, scantily draped in white, its one foot covered with a big blue sock, a dingy cap set rakingly askew on its shaven head, and placid satisfaction beaming in its broad red face as it flourished a mug in one hand, an old boot in the other, calling them canteen and knapsack, while it skipped and fluttered in the most unearthly fashion. What to do with the creature I didn't know. Dan was absent, and if I went to find him, the perambulator might festoon himself out of the window, set his toga on fire, or do some of his neighbors a mischief. The attendant of the room was sleeping like a near relative of the celebrated Seven, and nothing short of pins would rouse him, for he had been out that day, and whiskey asserted its supremacy in balmy whiffs. Still declaiming in a fine blow of eloquence, the demented gentleman hopped on, blind and deaf to my graspings and entreaties, and I was about to slam the door in his face and run for help, when a second and saner phantom, all in white, came to the rescue in the likeness of a big Prussian who spoke no English, but divined the crisis and put an end to it by bundling the lively monoped into his bed like a baby with an authoritative command to stay put, which received added weight from being delivered in an odd conglomeration of French and German, accompanied by warning wags of a head decorated with a yellow cotton nightcap, rendered most imposing by a tassel-like bell-pull. Rather exhausted by his excursion, the member from Pennsylvania subsided, and, after an irrepressible laugh together, my Prussian ally and myself were returning to our places when the echo of a sob caused us to glance along the beds. It came from one in the corner, such a small bed, and such a tearful little face looked up at us as we stopped beside it. The 12-years-old drummer boy was not singing now, but sobbing with a manly effort all the while to stifle the distressful sounds that would break out. "What is it, Teddy?" I asked as he rubbed the tears away, and checked himself in the middle of a great sob to answer plaintively. "I've got a chill, ma'am, but I ain't crying for that, 'cause I'm used to it. I dreamed Kit was here, and when I waked up he wasn't, and I couldn't help it then." The boy came in with the rest, and the man who was taken dead from the ambulance was the Kit he mourned. Well he might, for, when the wounded were brought from Fredericksburg, the child lay in one of the camps thereabout, and his good friend, though sorely hurt himself, would not leave him to the exposure and neglect of such a time and place, but wrapping him in his own blanket, carried him in his arms to the transport, tended him during the passage, and only yielded up his charge when death met him at the door of the hospital, which promised care and comfort for the boy. For 10 days Teddy had shivered or burned with fever and ague, pining the while for Kit, and refusing to be comforted because he had not been able to thank him for the generous protection which, perhaps, had cost the giver's life. the vivid dream that wrung the childish heart with a fresh pang, and when I tried the solace fitted for his years, the remorseful fear that haunted him found vent in a fresh burst of tears as he looked at the wasted hands I was endeavoring to warm. Oh, if I'd only been as thin when Kit carried me as I am now, maybe he wouldn't have died, but I was heavy. He was hurt worser than we knew, and so it killed him, and I didn't see him to say goodbye. This thought had troubled him in secret, and my assurances that his friend would probably have died at all events hardly assuaged the bitterness of his regretful grief. At this juncture, the delirious man began to shout. The one-legged rose up in his bed as if preparing for another dart. Teddy bewailed himself more piteously than before, and if ever a woman was at her wit's end, that distracted female was Nurse Periwinkle during the space of 2 or 3 minutes as she vibrated between the 3 beds like an agitated pendulum. Like a most opportune reinforcement, Dan the Bandy appeared and devoted himself to the lively party, leaving me free to return to my post, for the Prussian, with a nod and a smile, took the lad away to his own bed and lulled him to sleep with a soothing murmur like a mammoth, humble bee. I liked that in Fritz, and if he ever wondered afterward at the dainties which sometimes found their way into his rations or the extra comforts of his bed, he might have found a solution of the mystery in sundry persons' knowledge of that fatherly action of that night. Hardly was I settled again when the inevitable bull appeared, and its bearer delivered a message I had expected yet dreaded to receive. "John is going, ma'am, and wants to see you if you can come. The moment this boy is asleep, tell him so, and let me know if I'm in danger of being too late." My Ganymede departed, and while I quieted poor Shaw, I thought of John. He came in a day or two after the others, and one evening, when I entered my pathetic room, I found a lately emptied bed occupied by a large, fair man with a fine face and the serenest eyes I ever met. One of the earlier comers had often spoken of a friend who had remained behind, and those apparently worse wounded than himself might reach a shelter first. It seemed a David and Jonathan sort of friendship. The man fretted for his mate, and was never tired of praising John, his courage, sobriety, self-denial, and unfailing kindness of heart, always winding up with, "He's an out-and-out fine feller, ma'am. You see if he ain't." I had some curiosity to behold this piece of excellence, and when he came, watched him for a night or two before I made friends with him, for, to tell the truth, I was a little afraid of the stately-looking man whose bed had to be lengthened to accommodate his commanding stature, who seldom spoke, uttered no complaint, asked no sympathy, but tranquilly observed what went on about him, and, as he lay high upon his pillows, no picture of dying statesman or warrior was ever fuller of real dignity than this Virginia blacksmith. A most attractive face he had, framed in brown hair and beard, comely featured and full of vigor, and yet unsubdued by pain, thoughtful and often beautifully mild, while watching the afflictions of others, as if entirely forgetful of his own. His mouth was grave and firm, and plenty of will and courage in its lines, but a smile could make it as sweet as any woman's, and his eyes were child's eyes, looking one fairly in the face with a clear, straightforward glance, which promised well for such as placed their faith in him. He seemed to cling to life as if it were rich in duties and delights, and he had learned the secret of content. The only time I saw his composure disturbed was when my surgeon brought another to examine John, who scrutinized their faces with an anxious look, asking of the elder, "Do you think I shall pull through, sir?" "I hope so, my man." And as the two passed on, John's eyes still followed them with an intentness which would have won a clearer answer from them had they seen it. A momentary shadow flitted over his face, then came the usual serenity, as if, in that brief eclipse, he had acknowledged the existence of some hard possibility, and, asking nothing yet hoping all things, left the issue in God's hands, with that submission which is true piety. The next night, as I went my rounds with Dr. P., I happened to ask which man in the room probably suffered most, and, to my great surprise, he glanced at John. Every breath he draws is like a stab, for the ball pierced the left lung, broke a rib, and did no end of damage here and there, so the poor lad can find neither forgetfulness nor ease, because he must lie on his wounded back or suffocate. It will be a hard struggle and a long one, for he possesses great vitality, but even his tempered life can't save him. I wish it could. You don't mean he must die, doctor? Bless you, there's not the slightest hope for him, and you'd better tell him so before long. Women have a way of doing such things comfortably, so I leave it to you. He won't last more than a day or two at furthest. I could have sat down on the spot and cried heartily if I had not learned the wisdom of bottling up one's tears for leisure moments. Such an end seemed very hard for such a man when half a dozen worn-out, worthless bodies round him were gathering up the remnants of wasted lives to linger on for years perhaps, burdens to others, daily reproaches to themselves. The army needed men like John, earnest, brave, and faithful, fighting for liberty and justice with both heart and hand, true soldiers of the Lord. I could not give him up so soon, or think with any patience of so excellent a nature robbed of its fulfillment and blundered into eternity by the rashness or stupidity of those at whose hands so many lives may be required. It was an easy thing for Dr. P. to say, tell him he must die, but a cruelly hard thing to do, and by no means as comfortable as he politely suggested. I had not the heart to do it then, and privately indulged the hope that some change for the better might take place, in spite of gloomy prophecies so rendering my task unnecessary. A few minutes later, as I came in again with fresh rollers, I saw John sitting erect, with no one to support him while the surgeon dressed his back. I had never hitherto seen it done, for, having simpler wounds to attend to, and knowing the fidelity of the attendant, I had left John to him, thinking it might be more agreeable and safe, for both strength and experience were needed in his case. I had forgotten that the strong man might long for the gentle tendance of a woman's hands, the sympathetic magnetism of a woman's presence, as well as the feebler souls about him. The doctor's words caused me to reproach myself with neglect, not of any real duty perhaps, but of those little cares and kindnesses that solace homesick spirits and make the heavy hours pass easier. John looked lonely and forsaken just then, as he sat with head bent, hands folded on his knee, and no outward sign of suffering, till, looking nearer, I saw great tears roll down and drop upon the floor. It was a new sight there, for, though I had seen many suffer, some swore, some groaned, most endured silently, but none wept. Yet it did not seem weak, only very touching, and straightway my fear vanished, my heart opened wide and took him in, as gathering the bent head in my arms as freely as if he had been a little child, I said, "Let me help you bear it, John." Never on any human countenance have I seen so swift and beautiful a look of gratitude, surprise, and comfort as that which answered me more eloquently than the whispered, "Thank you, ma'am. This is right good. This is what I wanted." "Then why not ask for it before?" "I didn't like to be a trouble. You seem so busy, and I could manage to get on alone." "You shall not want it any more, John." Nor did he, for now I understood the wistful look that sometimes followed me as I went out, after a brief pause beside his bed, or merely a passing nod while busied with those who seemed to need me more than he, because more urgent in their demands. Now I knew that to him, as to so many, I was the poor substitute for mother, wife, or sister, and, in his eyes, no stranger, but a friend who hitherto had seemed neglectful, for in his modesty he had never guessed the truth. This was changed now. Through the tedious operation of probing, bathing, and dressing his wounds, he leaned against me, holding my hand fast, and, if pain wrung further tears from him, no one saw them fall but me. When he was laid down again, I hovered about him in a remorseful state of mind that would not let me rest till I had bathed his face, brushed his bonny brown hair, set all things smooth about him, and laid a knot of heath and heliotrope on his clean pillow. While doing this, he watched me with the satisfied expression I so like to see, and when I offered the little nosegay, held it carefully in his great hand, smoothed a ruffled leaf or two, surveyed and smelt it with an air of genuine delight, and lay contentedly regarding the glimmer of the sunshine on the green. Although the manliest man among my 40, he said, "Yes, ma'am," like a little boy, received suggestions for his comfort with the quick smile that brightened his whole face, and now and then, as I stood tidying the table by his bed, I felt him softly touch my gown as if to assure himself that I was there. Anything more natural and frank I never saw, and found this brave John as bashful as brave, yet full of excellencies and fine aspirations, which, having no power to express themselves in words, seemed to have bloomed into his character, and made him what he was. After that night, an hour of each evening that remained to him was devoted to his ease or pleasure. He could not talk much, for breath was precious, and he spoke in whispers, but from occasional conversations I gleaned scraps of private history, which only added to the affection and respect I felt for him. Once he asked me to write a letter, and as I settled pen and paper, I said, with an irrepressible glimmer of feminine curiosity, "Shall it be addressed to wife or mother, John?" "Neither, ma'am. I've got no wife, and will write to mother myself when I get better." "Do you think I was married because of this?" he asked, touching a plain ring he wore, and often turned thoughtfully on his finger when he lay alone. "Partly that, but more from a settled sort of look you have, a look which young men seldom get until they marry." "I didn't know that, but I'm not so very young, ma'am, 30 in May, and have been what you might call settled this 10 years, for mother's a widow. I'm the oldest child she has, and it wouldn't do for me to marry until Lizzie has a home of her own, and Laurie's learned his trade, for we're not rich, and I must be father to the children, and husband to the dear old woman if I can." "No doubt but you are both, John. Yet how came you to go to war if you felt so? Wasn't enlisting as bad as marrying?" "No, ma'am, not as I see it. For one is helping my neighbor, the other pleasing myself. I went because I couldn't help it. I didn't want the glory or the pay. I wanted the right thing done, and people kept saying the men who were in earnest ought to fight. I was in earnest, the Lord knows, but I held off as long as I could, not knowing which was my duty. Mother saw the case, gave me her ring to keep me steady, and said, 'Go.' So I went." A short story and a simple one, but the man and the mother were portrayed better than pages of fine writing could have done it. "Do you ever regret that you came when you lie here suffering so much?" "Never, ma'am. I haven't helped a great deal, but I've shown I was willing to give my life, and perhaps I've got to, but I don't blame anybody, and if it was to do over again, I'd do it. I'm a little sorry I wasn't wounded in front. It looks cowardly to be hit in the back, but I obeyed orders, and it don't matter in the end, I know." Poor John! It did not matter now, except that a shot in the front might have spared the long agony in store for him. He seemed to read the thought that troubled me, as he spoke so hopefully when there was no hope, for he suddenly added, "This is my first battle. Do they think it's going to be my last?" "I'm afraid they do, John." It was the hardest question I had ever been called upon to answer, doubly hard with those clear eyes fixed on mine, forcing a truthful answer by their own truth. He seemed a little startled at first, pondered over the fateful fact a moment, then shook his head with a glance at the broad chest and muscular limbs stretched out before him. "I'm not afraid, but it's difficult to believe all at once. I'm so strong it don't seem possible for such a little wound to kill me." Mary Mercutio's dying words glanced through my memory as he spoke. "'Tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door, but 'tis enough." And John would have said the same could he have seen the ominous black holes between his shoulders. He never had, and, seeing the ghastly sights about him, could not believe his own wound more fatal than these, for all the suffering it caused him. "Shall I write to your mother now?" I asked, thinking that these sudden tidings might change all plans and purposes, but they did not, for the man received the order of the divine commander to march with the same unquestioning obedience with which the soldier had received that of the human one, doubtless remembering that the first led him to life and the last to death. "No, ma'am, to Laurie, just the same. He'll break it to her best, and I'll add a line to her myself when you get done." So I wrote the letter, which he dictated, finding it better than any I had sent, for though here and there a little ungrammatical or inelegant, each sentence came to me briefly worded, but most expressive, full of excellent counsel to the boy, tenderly bequeathing Mother and Lizzie to his care, and bidding him good-bye in words the sadder for their simplicity. He added a few lines with steady hand, and, as I sealed it, said, with a patient sort of sigh, "I hope the answer will come in time for me to see it." Then, turning away his face, laid the flowers against his lips, as if to hide some quiver of emotion at the thought of such a sudden sundering of all the dear home ties. These things had happened 2 days before. Now John was dying, and the letter had not come. I had been summoned to many deathbeds in my life, but to none that made my heart ache as it did then, since my mother called me to watch the departure of a spirit akin to this in its gentleness and patient strength. As I went in, John stretched out both hands. "I know you'd come. I guess I'm moving on, ma'am." He was, and so rapidly that, even while he spoke, over his face I saw the gray veil falling that no human hand can lift. I sat down by him, wiped the drops from his forehead, stirred the air about him with the slow wave of a fan, and waited to help him die. He stood in sore need of help, and I could do so little, for, as the doctor had foretold, the strong body rebelled against death, and fought every inch of the way, forcing him to draw each breath with a spasm, and clench his hands with an imploring look, as if he asked, "How long must I endure this and be still?" For hours he suffered dumbly, without a moment's respire, or a moment's murmuring. His limbs grew cold, his face damp, his lips white, and again he tore the covering off his breast, as if the lightest weight added to his agony, yet through it all his eyes never lost their perfect serenity, and the man's soul seemed to sit therein undaunted by the ills that vexed his flesh. One by one the men woke, and round the room appeared a circle of pale faces and watchful eyes full of awe and pity, for, though a stranger, John was beloved by all. Each man there had wondered at his patience, respected his piety, admired his fortitude, and now lamented his hard death, for the influence of an upright nature had made itself deeply felt even in one little week. Presently the Jonathan who so loved his comely David came creeping from his bed for a last look and word. The kind soul was full of trouble, as the choke in his voice, the grasp of his hand betrayed, but there were no tears, and the farewell of the friends was the more touching for its brevity. "Old boy, how are you?" faltered the one. "Most through, thank heaven," whispered the other. "Can I say or do anything for ye anywheres?" "Take my things home, and tell them that I did my best." I will. Goodbye, Ned. Goodbye, John. Goodbye." They kissed each other tenderly, as women, and so parted, for poor Ned could not stay to see his comrade die. For a little while there was no sound in the room but the drip of water from a stump or two and John's distressful gasps as he had slowly breathed his life away. I thought him nearly gone, and had just laid down the fan, believing its help to be no longer needed, when suddenly he rose up in his bed and cried out with a bitter cry that broke the silence, sharply startling everyone with its agonized appeal. "For God's sake, give me air!" It was the only cry pain or death had wrung from him, the only boon he had asked, and none of us could grant it, for all the airs that blew were useless now. Dan flung up the window. The first red streak of dawn was warming the gray east, a herald of the coming sun. John saw it, and, with the love of light which lingers in us to the end, seemed to read in it a sign of hope, of help, for over his whole face there broke that mysterious expression, brighter than any smile, which often comes to eyes that look their last. He laid himself gently down, and, stretching out his strong right arm as if to grasp and bring the blessed air to his lips in a fuller flow, lapsed into a merciful unconsciousness, which assured us that for him suffering was forever past. He died then, for though the heavy breaths still tore their way up for a little longer, they were but the waves of an ebbing tide that beat unfelt against the wreck which an immortal voyager had deserted with a smile. He never spoke again, but to the end held my hand close, so close that when he was asleep at last, I could not draw it away. Dan helped me, warning me as he did so that it was unsafe for dead and living flesh to lie so long together, but though my hand was strangely cold and stiff, and 4 white marks remained across its back even when warmth and color had returned elsewhere, I could not but be glad that, through its touch, the presence of human sympathy, perhaps, had lightened that hard hour. When they had made him ready for the grave, John lay in state for half an hour, a thing which seldom happened in that busy place, but a universal sentiment of reverence and affection seemed to fill the hearts of all who had known or heard of him. And when the rumor of his death went through the house, always astir, many came to see him, and I felt a tender sort of pride in my lost patient, for he looked a most heroic figure, lying there stately and still as the statue of some young knight asleep upon his tomb. The lovely expression which so often beautifies dead faces soon replaced the marks of pain, and I longed for those who loved him best to see him when half an hour's acquaintance with death had made them friends. As we stood looking at him, the ward-master handed me a letter saying it had been forgotten the night before. It was John's letter, come just an hour too late to gladden the eyes that had longed and looked for it so eagerly. Yet he had it, for after I had cut some brown locks for his mother and taken off the ring to send her, telling how well the talisman had done its work, I kissed this good son for her sake and laid the letter in his hand, still folded as when I drew my own away, feeling that its place was there, and making myself happy with the thought that, even in his solitary place in the government lot, he would not be without some token of the love which makes life beautiful and outlives death. Then I left him, glad to have known so genuine a man, and carrying with me an enduring memory of the brave Virginia blacksmith as he lay serenely waiting for the dawn of that long day which knows no night. Chapter 5. Off Duty. My dear girl, we shall have you sick in your bed unless you keep yourself warm and quiet for a few days. Widow Wadman can take care of the ward alone, now the men are so comfortable, and have her vacation when you are about again. Now do be prudent in time, and don't let me have to add a periwinkle to my bouquet of patients. This advice was delivered in a paternal manner by the youngest surgeon in the hospital, a kind-hearted little gentleman who seemed to consider me a frail young blossom that needed much cherishing instead of a tough old spinster who had been knocking about the world for 30 years. At this time I write of, he discovered me sitting on the stairs with a nice cloud of unwholesome steam rising from the washroom, a party of January breezes disporting themselves in the halls, and perfumes by no means from Araby the Blessed, keeping them company while I enjoyed a fit of coughing, which caused my head to spin in a way that made the application of a cool banister both necessary and agreeable, as I waited for the frolicsome wind to restore the breath I'd lost, cheering myself meantime with a secret conviction that pneumonia was waiting for me round the corner. This piece of advice had been offered by several persons for a week, and refused by me with the obstinacy with which my sex is so richly gifted. But the last few hours had developed several surprising internal and external phenomena, which impressed upon me the fact that if I didn't make a masterly retreat very soon, I should tumble down somewhere and have to be borne ignominiously from the field. My head felt like a cannonball, my feet had a tendency to cleave to the floor, the walls at times undulated in a most disagreeable manner, people looked unnaturally big, and the very bottles on the mantel shelf appeared to dance derisively before my eyes. Taking these things into consideration while blinking stupidly at Dr. Z, I resolved to retire gracefully, if I must, so with a valedictory to my boys, a private lecture to Mrs. Wadman, and a fervent wish that I could take off my body and work in my soul, I mournfully ascended to my apartment, and Nurse P. was reported off duty. For the benefit of any ardent damsel whose patriotic fancy may have surrounded hospital life with a halo of charms, I will briefly describe the bower to which I retired in a somewhat ruinous condition. It was well ventilated, for 5 panes of glass had suffered compound fractures, which all the surgeons and nurses had failed to heal. The 2 windows were draped with sheets, the church hospital opposite being a brick and mortar Argus, and the female mind cherishing a prejudice in favor of redressy during the night-capped periods of existence. A bare floor supported 2 narrow iron beds spread with thin mattresses like plasters, furnished with pillows in the last stages of consumption. In a fireplace, guiltless of shovel, tongs, andirons, or grate, burned a log inch by inch, being too long to go on all at once, so while the fire blazed away at one end, I did the same at the other, as I tripped over it a dozen times a day, and flew up to poke it a dozen times at night. A mirror, let us be elegant, of the dimensions of a muffin, and about as reflective, hung over a tin basin, blue pitcher, and a brace of yellow mugs. 2 invalid tables, ditto chairs, wandering here and there, and the closet contained a varied collection of bonnets, bottles, bags, boots, bread and butter, boxes, and bugs. The closet was a regular Bluebeard cupboard to me. I always opened it with fear and trembling owing to rats, and shut it in anguish of spirit, for time and space were not to be had, and chaos reigned along with the rats. Our chimney-piece was decorated with a flat iron, a Bible, a candle minus stick, a lavender bottle, a new tin pan so brilliant that it served nicely for a pier glass, and such of the portly black bugs as preferred a warmer climate than the rubbish hole afforded. 2 arks, commonly called trunks, lurked behind the door, containing the worldly goods of the twain who laughed and cried, slept and scrambled in this refuge, while from the white-washed walls above either bed looked down the pictured faces of those whose memory can make for us one little room and everywhere. For a day or two I managed to appear at meals, for the human grub must eat till the butterfly is ready to break loose, and no one had time to come up 2 flights while it was possible for me to come down. Far be it from me to add another affliction or reproach to that enduring man, the steward, for, compared with his predecessor, he was a horn of plenty, but I put it to any candid mind, is not the following bill of fare susceptible of improvement without plunging the nation madly into debt? The 3 meals were pretty much of a muchness, and consisted of beef, evidently put down for the men of 76, pork just in from the street, army bread composed of sawdust and saleratus, butter, salt as if churned by Lot's wife, stewed blackberries so much like preserved cockroaches that only those devoid of imagination could partake thereof with relish, coffee, mild and muddy, tea, 3 dried huckleberry leaves to a quart of water flavored with lime, also animated and unconscious of any approach to clearness. Variety being the spice of life, a small pinch of the article would have been appreciated by the hungry, hard-working sisterhood, one of whom, thought accustomed to plain fare, soon found herself reduced to bread and water, having an inborn repugnance to the fat of the land and the salt of the earth. Another peculiarity of these hospital meals was the rapidity with which the edibles vanished and the impossibility of getting a drop or crumb after the usual time. At the first ring of the bell, a general stampede took place. Some 20 hungry souls rushed to the dining room, swept over the table like a swarm of locusts, and left no fragment for any tardy creature who arrived 15 minutes late. Thinking it of more importance than the patients should be well and comfortably fed, I took my time about my own meals for the first day or 2 after I came, but was speedily enlightened by Isaac, the black waiter, who bore with me a few times and then informed me, looking as stern as fate, "I say, ma'am, if you come so late, you can't have no victuals, 'cause I'm bleeding for to get things ready for de doctors, mazin' spry arter you nusses and folks is done. De gentlemen don't care for to wait no more does I, so you just please ter come at de time and there won't be no frettin' nowheres." It was a new sensation to stand looking at a full table, painfully conscious of one of the vacuums which nature abhors, and receive orders to right about face, without partaking of the nourishment which your inner woman clamorously demanded. The doctors always fared better than we, and for a moment a desperate impulse prompted me to give them a hint by walking off with the mutton or confiscating the pie. But Ike's eye was on me, and to my shame be it spoken, I walked meekly away, went dinnerless that day, and that evening went to market, laying in a small stock of crackers, cheese, and apples, that my boys might not be neglected, nor myself obliged to both solid and liquid dyspepsias, or starve. This plan would have succeeded admirably had not the evil star under which I was born been in the ascendant during that month, and cast its malign influences even into my humble larder, for the rats had their dessert off my cheese, the bugs set up housekeeping in my cracker bag, and the apples, like all worldly riches, took to themselves wings and flew away. Whether no man could tell, though certain black imps might have thrown light upon the matter, had not the plaintiff in the case been loath to add another to the many trials of long-suffering Africa. After this failure, I resigned myself to fate, and remembering that bread was called the staff of life, leaned pretty exclusively upon it, but it proved a broken reed, and I came to the ground after a few weeks of prison fare, varied by an occasional potato or surreptitious sip of milk. Very soon after leaving the care of my ward, I discovered that I had no appetite, and cut the bread and butter interests almost entirely, trying the exercise and sun cure instead. Flattering myself that I had plenty of time and could see all that was to be seen, so far as the lone, lorn female could venture in a city, one half of whose male population seemed to be taking the other half to the guardhouse, every morning I took a brisk run in one direction or another, for the January days were as mild as spring. A rollicking north wind and occasional snowstorm would have been more to my taste, for the one would have braced and refreshed tired body and soul, the other have purified the air and spread a clean coverlid over the bed wherein the capital of these United States appeared to be dozing pretty soundly just then. One of these trips was to the Armory Hospital, the neatness, comfort, and convenience of which makes it an honor to its presiding genius and arouses all the covetous propensities of such nurses as came from other hospitals to visit it. The long, clean, warm, and airy wards, built barrack fashion, with the nurse's room at the end, were fully appreciated by Nurse Periwinkle, whose ward and private bower were cold, dirty, inconvenient, upstairs and downstairs, and in everybody's chamber. At the Armory, in Ward K, I found a cheery, bright-eyed, white-aproned little lady reading at her post near the stove, matting under her feet, a draught of fresh air flowing in above her head, a table full of trays, glasses, and such matters on one side, a large, well-stocked medicine chest on the other, and all her duties seemed to be going about now and then to give doses, issue orders, which well-trained attendants executed, and pet, advise, or comfort Tom, Dick, or Harry as she found best. As I watched the proceedings, I recalled my own tribulations and contrasted the two hospitals in a way that would have caused my summary dismissal could it have been reported at headquarters. Here, order, method, common sense, and liberality reigned and ruled in a style that did one's heart good to see. At the Hurly-Burly Hotel, disorder, discomfort, bad management, and no visible head reduced things to a condition which I despair of describing. The circumlocution fashion prevailed, forms and fusses tormented our souls, and unnecessary strictness in one place was counterbalanced by unpardonable laxity in another. Here is a sample. I am dressing Sam Dammer's shoulder, and having cleansed the wound, look about for some strips of adhesive plaster to hold on the little square of wet linen which is to cover the gunshot wound. The case is not in the tray. Frank, the sleepy, half-sick attendant, knows nothing of it. We rummage high and low. Sam is tired and fumes. Frank dawdles and yawns. The men advise and laugh at the flurry. I feel like a boiling tea kettle with the lid ready to fly off and damage somebody. Go and borrow some from the next ward and spend the rest of the day in finding ours, I finally command. A pause, then Frank scuffles back with the message, Miss Peppercorn ain't got none. It says you ain't no business to lose your own duds and go borrowing other folks's. I say nothing for fear of saying too much, but fly to the surgery. Mr. Toddypestle informs me that I can't have anything without an order from the surgeon of my ward. Great heavens, where is he? And away I rush, up and down, here and there, till at last I find him in a state of bliss over complicated amputation in the 4th story. I make my demand, he answers in 5 minutes, and works away with his head upside down as he ties an artery, saws a bone, or does a little needlework with a visible relish and very sanguinary pair of hands. The 5 minutes grow to 15, and Frank appears with the remark that Dammer wants to know what in the thunder you're keeping him there with his finger on a wet rag for. Dr. P tears himself away long enough to scribble the order, with which I plunge downward to the surgery again, find the door locked, and while hammering away on it, am told that 2 friends are waiting to see me in the hall. The matron being away, her parlor is locked, and there is nowhere to see my guests but in my own room, and no time to enjoy them till the plaster is found. I settle this matter and circulate through the house to find Toddy Pestle, who has no right to leave the surgery till night. He is discovered in the dead house, smoking a cigar, and very much the worse for his researches among the spirituous preparations that fill the surgery shelves. He is inclined to be gallant and puts the finishing blow to the fire of my wrath, for the tea kettle lid flies off, and driving him before me to his post, I fling down the order, take what I choose, and leaving the absurd incapable kissing his hand to me, depart feeling as Grandma Ridgelesty is reported to have done when she vainly sought for chips in Bimlick Jackwood's shiftless pasture. I find Dammer a well-acted charade of his own name, and just as I get him done, struggling the while with a burning desire to clap an adhesive strip across his mouth, full of heaven-defying oaths, Frank takes up his boot to put it on and exclaims, "I'm blessed if here ain't that case now. I recollect seeing it pitchin' this mornin', but forgot all about it to my heel when smash enter it. Here, ma'am, catch hold on it and give the boys a sheet on all rounds 'gainst it tumbles inter t'other boot next time you want it." If a look could annihilate Francis Softbox, would have ceased to exist, but it couldn't, therefore, yet he lives, to aggravate some unhappy woman's soul and wax fat in some equally congenial situation. Now, while I'm freeing my mind, I should like to enter my protest against employing convalescents as attendants instead of strong, properly trained, and cheerful men. How it may be in other places I cannot say, but here it was a source of constant trouble and confusion, these feeble, ignorant men trying to sweep, scrub, lift, and wait upon their sicker comrades. One with a diseased heart was expected to run up and down stairs, carry heavy trays, and move helpless men. He tried it and grew rapidly worse than when he first came, and when he was ordered out to march away to the convalescent hospital, fell in a sort of fit before he turned the corner and was brought back to die. Another, hurt by a fall from his horse, endeavored to do his duty, but failed entirely, and the wrath of the ward-master fell upon the nurse, who must either scrub the rooms herself or take the lecture, for the boy looked stout and well, and the master never happened to see him turn white with pain, or hear him groan in his sleep when an involuntary motion strained his poor back. Constant complaints were being made of incompetent attendants, and some dozen women did double duty and then were blamed for breaking down. If any hospital director fancies this a good and economical arrangement, allow one used-up nurse to tell him it isn't, and beg him to spare the sisterhood who sometimes, in their sympathy, forget that they are mortal and run the risk of being made immortal sooner than is agreeable to their partial friends. Another of my few rambles took me to the Senate chamber, hoping to hear and see if this large machine was run any better than some small ones I knew of. I was too late, and found the speaker's chair occupied by a colored gentleman of 10, while two others were on their legs having a hot debate on the cornball question as they gathered the waste paper strewn about the floor into bags, and several white members played leapfrog over the desks, a much wholesomer relaxation than some of the older senators indulge in, I fancy. Finding the coast clear, I likewise gambled up and down from gallery to gallery, sat in Sumner's chair, and cudgeled an imaginary Brooks within an inch of his life, examined Wilson's books in the coolest possible manner, warmed my feet at one of the national registers, read people's names on scattered envelopes, and pocketed a castaway autograph or two. Watched the somewhat unparliamentary proceedings going on about me, and wondered who in the world all the sedate gentlemen were who kept popping out of odd doors here and there like respectable jacks in the box. Then I wandered over the palatial residence of Mrs. Columbia and examined its many beauties, though I can't say I thought her a tidy housekeeper, and didn't admire her taste in pictures, for the eye of this humble individual soon wearied of expiring patriots, who all appeared to be quitting their earthly tabernacles in convulsions, ruffled shirts, and a whirl of torn banners, bombshells, and buff and blue arms and legs. The statuary also was massive and concrete, but rather wearying to examine, for the colossal ladies and gentlemen carried no cards of introduction in face or figure, so whether the meditative party in a kilt with well-developed legs, shoes like army slippers, and a ponderous nose was Columbus, Cato, or Cockalorum Tibi, the tragedian was more than I could tell. Several robust ladies attracted me, but which was America and which Pocahontas was a mystery, for all affected much looseness of costume, dishevelment of hair, swords, arrows, lances, scales, and other adornments quite passé with damsels of our day, whose effigies should go down to posterity armed with fans, crochet needles, riding whips, and parasols, with here and there one holding pen or pencil, rolling pin, or broom. The Statue of Liberty I recognized at once, for it had no pedestal as yet, but stood flat in the mud, with young America most symbolically making dirt pies and chip forts in its shadow. But high above the squabbling little throng and their petty plans, the sun shone full on Liberty's broad forehead, and in her hand some summer bird had built its nest. I accepted the good omen then, and on the 1st of January, the Emancipation Act gave the statue a nobler and more enduring pedestal than any marble or granite ever carved and quarried by human bands. One trip to Georgetown Heights, where cedars sighed overhead, dead leaves rustled underfoot, pleasant paths led up and down, and a brook wound like a silver snake by the blackened ruins of some French minister's house, through the poor gardens of the black washerwomen who congregated there, and, passing the cemetery with a murmurous lullaby, lulled away to pay its little tribute to the river. This breezy run was the last I took, for on the morrow came rain and wind, and confinement soon proved a powerful reinforcement to the enemy, who was quietly preparing to spring a mine and blow me 500 miles from the position I had taken in what I called my Chickahominy swamp. Shut up in my room with no voice, spirits, or books, that week was not a holiday by any means. Finding meals a humbug, I stopped away altogether, trusting that if this sparrow was of any worth, the Lord would not let it fall to the ground. Like a flock of friendly ravens, my sister nurses fed me, not only with food for the body, but kind words for the mind, and soon, from being half-starved, I found myself so beteated and betoasted, petted and served, that I was quite in the lap of luxury in spite of cough, headache, a painful consciousness of my pleura, and a realizing sense of bones in the human frame. From the pleasant house on the hill, the home in the heart of Washington, and the Willard caravansary came friends new and old, with bottles, baskets, carriages, and invitations for the invalid, and daily our Florence Nightingale climbed the steep stairs, stealing a moment from her busy life to watch over the stranger of whom she was as thoughtfully tender as any mother. Long may she wave. Whatever others think or say, Nurse Periwinkle is forever grateful, and among her relics of that Washington defeat none is more valued than the little book which appeared on her pillow one dreary day, for the D.D. written in it means to her far more than Doctor of Divinity. Being forbidden to meddle with fleshy arms and legs, I solaced myself by mending cotton ones, and, as I sat sewing at my window, watched the moving panorama that passed below, amusing myself with taking notes of the most striking figures in it. Long trains of army wagons kept up a perpetual rumble from morning till night. Ambulances rattled to and fro, with busy surgeons, nurses taking an airing, or convalescents going in parties to be fitted to artificial limbs. Strings of sorry-looking horses passed, saying as plainly as dumb creatures could, "Why, in a city full of them, is there no hospital for us?" Often a cart came by with several rough coffins in it, and no mourners following. Barouches with invalid officers rolled round the corner, and carriage loads of pretty children with black coachmen, footmen, and maids. The women who took their walks abroad were so extinguished in three-story bonnets with overhanging balconies of flowers that their charms were obscured, and all I could say of them is that they dressed in the worst possible taste and walked like ducks. The men did the picturesque, and did it so well that Washington looked like a mammoth masquerade. Spanish hats, scarlet-lined riding cloaks, swords and sashes, high boots and bright spurs, beards and mustaches, which made plain faces comely, and comely faces heroic, these vanities of the flesh transformed our butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers into gallant riders of gaily caparisoned horses much handsomer than themselves, and dozens of such figures were constantly prancing by with private prickings of spurs for the benefit of the perambulating flower-bed. Some of these gentlemen affected painfully tight uniforms and little caps, kept on by some new law of gravitation, as they covered only the bridge of the nose, yet never fell off. The men looked like stuffed fowls, and rode as if the safety of the nation depended on their speed alone. The fattest, grayest officers dressed most, and ambled statelily along, with orderlies behind, trying to look as if they didn't know the stout party in front, and doing much caracoling on their own account. The mules were my especial delight, and an hour's study of a constant succession of them introduced me to many of their characteristics, for 6 of these odd little beasts drew each army wagon, and went hopping like frogs through the stream of mud that gently rolled along the street. The coquettish mule had small feet, a nice trimmed tassel of a tail, perked up ears, and seemed much given to little tosses of the head, effected skips and prances, and, if he wore the bells, or were bedizened with a bit of finery, put on as many airs as any belle. The moral mule was a stout, hard-working creature, always tugging with all his might, often pulling away after the rest had stopped, laboring under the conscientious delusion that food for the entire army depended upon his private exertions. I respected this style of mule, and, had I possessed a juicy cabbage, would have pressed it upon him with thanks for his excellent example. The historical mule was a melodramatic quadruped, prone to startling humanity by erratic leaps and wild plunges, much shaking of his stubborn head and lashing out of his vicious heels, now and then falling flat and apparently dying a la Forrest, a gasp, a squirm, a flop, and so on, till the street was well blocked up, the drivers all swearing like demons in bad hats, and the chief actor's circulation decidedly quickened by every variety of kick, cuff jerk, and haul. When the last breath seemed to have left his body, and doctors were in vain, a sudden resurrection took place, and if ever a mule laughed with scornful triumph, that was the beast, as he leisurely rose, gave a comfortable shake, and calmly regarded the excited crowd, seemed to say, "A hit, a decided hit, for the stupidest of animals has bamboozled a dozen men. Now then, what are you stopping the way for?" The pathetic mule was perhaps the most interesting of all, for, though he always seemed to be the smallest, thinnest, weakest of the 6, the postilion with big boots, long-tailed coat, and heavy whip was sure to bestride this one, who struggled feebly along, head down, coat muddy and rough, eye spiritless and sad, his very tail a mortified stump, and the whole beast a picture of meek misery fit to touch a heart of stone. The jovial mule was a roly-poly, happy-go-lucky little piece of horseflesh, taking everything easily, from cudgeling to caressing, strolling along with a roguish twinkle of the eye, and, if the thing were possible, would have had his hands in his pockets and whistled as he went. If there ever chanced to be an apple core, a stray turnip, or a wisp of hay in the gutter, this Mark Tapley was sure to find it, and none of his mates seemed to begrudge him his bite. I suspected this fellow was the peacemaker, confidant, and friend of all the others, for he had a sort of cheer up, old boy, I'll pull you through look, which was exceedingly engaging. Pigs also possessed attractions for me, never having had an opportunity of observing their graces of mind and manner till I came to Washington, whose porcine citizens appeared to enjoy a larger liberty than many of its human ones. Stout, sedate-looking pigs hurried by each morning to their places of business with a preoccupied air and sonorous greeting to their friends. Genteel pigs, with an extra curl to their tails, promenaded in pairs, lunching here and there like gentlemen of leisure. Rowdy pigs pushed the passers-by off the sidewalk. Tipsy pigs hiccoughed their version of "We won't go home till morning" from the gutter, and delicate young pigs tripped daintily through the mud as if, like Mrs. Periwinkle, they plumed themselves upon their ankles and kept themselves particularly neat in point of stockings. Maternal pigs, with their interesting families, strolled by in the sun, and often the pink baby-like squealers lay down for a nap with a trust in Providence worthy of human imitation. But more interesting than officers, ladies, mules, or pigs were my colored brothers and sisters, because so unlike the respectable members of society I'd known in moral Boston. Here was the genuine article. No, not the genuine article at all. We must go to Africa for that. But the sort of creatures generations of slavery have made them: obsequious, trickish, lazy, and ignorant, yet kind-hearted, merry-tempered, quick to feel and accept the least token of the brotherly love which is slowly teaching the white hand to grasp the black in this great struggle for the liberty of both the races. Having been warned not to be too rampant on the subject of slavery, as Sikhish principles flourished even under the respectable nose of Father Abraham, I had endeavored to walk discreetly and curb my unruly member, looking about me with all my eyes the while, and saving up the result of my observations for future use. I had not been there a week before the neglected devil-may-care expression in many of the faces about me seemed an urgent appeal to leave nursing white bodies and take some care for these black souls. Much as the lazy boys and saucy girls tormented me, I liked them and found that any show of interest or friendliness brought out the better traits which live in the most degraded and forsaken of us all. I liked their cheerfulness, for the dreariest old hag, who scrubbed all day in that pestilential stream, gossiped and grinned all the way out when night set her free from drudgery. The girls romped with their dusky sweethearts or tossed their babies with the tender pride that makes mother love a beautifier to the homeliest face. The men and boys sang and whistled all day long, and often as I held my watch, the silence of the night was sweetly broken by some chorus from the street full of real melody, whether the song was of heaven or of hoe cakes, and as I listened, I felt that we never should doubt nor despair concerning a race which, through such griefs and wrongs, still clings to this good gift, and seems to solace with it the patient hearts that wait and watch and hope until the end. I expected to have to defend myself from accusations of prejudice against color, but was surprised to find things just the other way, and daily shocked some neighbor by treating the blacks as I did the whites. The men would swear at the darkies, would put 2 G's into Negro, and scoff at the idea of any good coming from such trash. The nurses were willing to be served by the colored people, but seldom thanked them, never praised, and scarcely recognized them in the street, whereat the blood of 2 generations of abolitionists waxed hot in my veins, and at the first opportunity proclaimed itself, and asserted the right of free speech as doggedly as the irrepressible Folsom herself. Happening to catch up a funny little black baby who was toddling about the nurse's kitchen one day when I went down to make a mess for some of my men, a Virginia woman standing by elevated her most prominent features with a sniff of disapprobation, exclaiming, "Gracious, Miss P., how can you? I've been here 6 months and never so much as touched the little toad with a poker." "More shame for you, ma'am," responded Miss P., and, with the natural perversity of a Yankee, followed up the blow by kissing the toad with ardor. His face was providentially as clean and shiny as if his mamma had just polished it up with a corner of her apron and a drop from the tea kettle spout like old Aunt Chloe. This rash act and the anti-slavery lecture that followed, while one hand stirred gruel for sick America and the other hugged baby Africa, did not produce the cheering result which I fondly expected, for my comrade henceforth regarded me as a dangerous fanatic, and my protege nearly came to his death by insisting on swarming upstairs to my room on all occasions and being walked on like a little black spider. I waited for New Year's Day with more eagerness than I had ever known before, and, though it brought me no gift, I felt rich in the act of justice so tardily performed towards some of those about me. As the bells rung midnight, I electrified my roommate by dancing out of bed, throwing up the window, and flapping my handkerchief with a feeble cheer in answer to the shout of a group of colored men in the street below. All night they tooted and tramped, fired crackers, sung Glory Hallelujah, and took comfort, poor souls, in their own way. The sky was clear, the moon shone benignly, a mild wind blew across the river, and all good omens seemed to usher in the dawn of the day whose noontide cannot now be long in coming. If the colored people had taken hands and danced around the White House with a few cheers for the much-abused gentleman who has immortalized himself by one just act, no president could have had a finer levee or one to be prouder of. While these sights and sounds were going on without, curious scenes were passing within, and I was learning that one of the best methods of fitting oneself to be a nurse in a hospital is to be a patient there, for then only can one wholly realize what the men suffer and sigh for, how acts of kindness touch and win, how much or little we are to those about us, and for the first time really see that in coming there we have taken our lives in our hands and may have to pay dearly for a brief experience. Everyone was very kind. The attendants of my ward often came up to report progress, to fill my woodbox, or bring messages and presents from the boys. The nurses took many steps with those tired feet of theirs, and several came each evening to chat over my fire and make things cozy for the night. The doctors paid daily visits, tapped in my lungs to see if pneumonia was within, left doses without names, and went away, leaving me as ignorant and much more uncomfortable than when they came. Hours began to get confused, people looked odd, queer faces haunted the room, and the nights were one long fight with weariness and pain. Letters from home grew anxious. The doctors lifted their eyebrows and nodded ominously. Friends said, "Don't stay," and an internal rebellion seconded the advice. But the 3 months were not out, and the idea of giving up so soon was proclaiming a defeat before I was fairly routed. So to all "don't stays" I opposed "I wills," till one fine morning a gray-headed gentleman rose like a welcome ghost on my hearth, and, at the sight of him, my resolution melted away, my heart turned traitor to my boys, and when he said, "Come home," I answered, "Yes, Father," and so ended my career as an army nurse. I never shall regret the going, though a sharp tussle with typhoid, $10, and a wig are all the visible results of the experiment, for one may live and learn much in a month. A good fit of illness proves the value of health, real danger tries one's mettle, and self-sacrifice sweetens character. Let no one who sincerely desires to help the work on in this way delay going through any fear, for the worth of life lies in the experiences that fill it, and this is one which cannot be forgotten. All that is best and bravest in the hearts of men and women comes out in scenes like these, and, though a hospital is a rough school, its lessons are both stern and salutary, and the humblest of pupils there, in proportion to his faithfulness, learns a deeper faith in God and in himself. I, for one, would return tomorrow on the up again and take another principle, if I could, for the amount of pleasure and profit I got out of that month compensates for all the pangs, and though a sadly womanish feeling, I take some satisfaction in the thought that, if I could not lay my head on the altar of my country, I have my hair, and that is more than handsome Helen did for her dead husband when she sacrificed only the ends of her ringlets on his urn. Therefore, I close this little chapter of hospital experiences with the regret that they were no better worth recording, and add the poetical gem with which I console myself for the untimely demise of Nurse Periwinkle. Oh, lay her in a little pit with a marble stone to cover it, and carve thereon a gruel spoon to show a nuss has died too soon. Chapter 6. A Postscript. My dear S., as inquiries like your own have come to me from various friendly readers of the sketches, I will answer them en masse and in printed form as a sort of postscript to what has gone before. One of these questions was, are there no services by hospital deathbeds or on Sundays? In most hospitals, I hope there are. In ours, the men died and were carried away with as little ceremony as on a battlefield. The first event of this kind which I witnessed was so very brief, and bare of anything like reverence, sorrow, or pious consolation, that I heartily agreed with the bluntly expressed opinion of a Maine man lying next his comrade, who died with no visible help near him but a compassionate woman and a tender-hearted Irishman, who dropped upon his knees and told his beads with Catholic fervor for the good of his Protestant brother's parting soul. If ever gets in all the hard knocks, we are left to die this way, but nothing but a Paddy's prayers to help us. I guess Christians are rather scarce round Washington. I thought so too, but thought Miss Blank, one of my mates, anxious that souls should be ministered to as well as bodies, spoke more than once to the chaplain. Nothing ever came of it. Unlike another shepherd whose earnest piety weekly purified the Senate chamber, this man did not feed as well as fold his flock, nor make himself a human symbol of the divine Samaritan who never passes by on the other side. I have since learned that our non-committal chaplain had been a professor in some Southern college, and, though he maintained that he had no secesh proclivities, I can testify that he seceded from his ministerial duties, I may say skedaddled, for, being one of his own words, it is as appropriate as inelegant. He read Emerson, quoted Carlyle, and tried to be a chaplain, but judging from his success, I am afraid he still hankered after the hominy pots of rebeldom. Occasionally, on a Sunday afternoon, such of the nurses, officers, attendants, and patients as could avail themselves of it were gathered in the ballroom for an hour's service, of which the singing was the better part. To me, it seemed that if ever strong, wise, and loving words were needed, it was then. If ever mortal man had living texts before his eyes to illustrate and illuminate his thought, it was there, and if ever hearts were prompted to devoutest self-abnegation, it was in the work of which brought us to anything but a chapel of ease. But some spiritual paralysis seemed to have befallen our pastor, for, the many faces turned toward him full of the dumb hunger that often comes to men when suffering or danger brings them nearer to the heart of things, they were offered the chaff of dignity, and its wheat was left for less needy gleaners who knew where to look. Even the fine old Bible stories, which may have made as lifelike as any history of our own day by a vivid fancy and pictorial diction, were robbed of all their charms by dry explanations and literal applications, instead of being useful and pleasant lessons to those men whom weakness had rendered as docile as children in a father's hands. I watched the listless countenances all about me, while a mild Daniel was moralizing in a den of utterly uninteresting lions, while Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were leisurely passing through the fiery furnace where, I sadly feared, some of us sincerely wished they had remained as permanencies while the Temple of Solomon was laboriously erected, with minute descriptions of the process, and any quantity of bells and pomegranates on the raiment of the priests. Listless they were at the beginning, and listless at the end, but the instant some stirring old hymn was given out, sleepy eyes brightened, lounging figures sat erect, and many a poor lad rose up in his bed or stretched an eager hand for the book, while all broke out with a heartiness that proved that somewhere, at the core of even the most abandoned, there still glowed some remnant of the native piety that flows in music from the heart of every little child. Even the big rebel joined and boomed away in a thunderous bass, singing, "Salvation, let the echoes fly," as energetically as if he felt the need of a speedy execution of the command. That was the pleasantest moment of the hour, for then it seemed a homelike and happy spot, the groups of men looking over one another's shoulders as they sang, the few silent figures in the beds. Here and there a woman noiselessly performed some necessary duty, and singing as she worked, while in the armchair standing in the midst, I placed, for my own satisfaction, the imaginary likeness of a certain faithful pastor, who took all outcasts by the hand, smote the devil in whatever guise he came, and comforted the indigent in spirit with the best wisdom of a great and tender heart, which still speaks to us from its Italian grave. With that addition, my picture was complete, and I often longed to take a veritable sketch of a hospital Sunday, for, despite its drawbacks consisting of continued labor, the want of proper books, the barren preaching that bore no fruit, this day was never like the other 6. True to their home training, our New England boys did their best to make it what it should be. With many, there was much reading of testaments, humming over of favorite hymns, and looking at such books as I could cull from a miscellaneous library. Some lay idle, slept, or gossiped, yet when I came to them for a quiet evening chat, they often talked freely and well of themselves, would blunder out some timid hope that their troubles might do 'em good and keep 'em steady, would choke a little as they said good night and turned their face to the wall to think of mother, wife, or home. These human ties seemed to be the most vital religion which they yet knew. I observed that some of them did not wear their caps on this day, though at other times they clung to them like Quakers, wearing them in bed, putting them on to read the paper, eat an apple, or write a letter, as if, like a new sort of Samson, their strength lie not in their hair, but in their hats. Many read no novels, swore less, were more silent, orderly, and cheerful, as if the Lord were an invisible ward-master who went his rounds but once a week, and must find all things at their best. I liked all this in the poor rough boys, and could have found it in my heart to put down sponge and teapot and preach a little sermon then and there, while homesickness and pain had made these natures soft, and some good seed might be cast therein to blossom and bear fruit here or hereafter. Regarding the admission of friends to nurse their sick, I can only say it was not allowed at Hurly-Burly House. The one indomitable parent took my ward by storm, and held her position in spite of doctors, matron, and Nurse Periwinkle. Though it was against the rules, though the culprit was an acid, frostbitten female, though the young man would have done quite as well without her anxious fussiness, and the whole roomful been much more comfortable, there was something so irresistible in this persistent devotion that no one had the heart to oust her from her post. She slept on the floor without uttering a complaint, bore jokes somewhat of the rudest, fared scantily, though her basket was daily filled with luxuries for her boy, and tended that petulant personage with a never-failing patience beautiful to see. I feel a glow of moral rectitude in saying this of her, for, though a perfect pelican to her young, she pecked and cackled. I don't know that pelicans usually express their emotions in that manner, most obstreperously, when others invaded her premises and led me a weary life with George's tea rusks, George's foot bath, George's measles, and George's mother, till after a sharp passage of arms and tongues with the matron, she wrathfully packed up her rusks, her son, and herself, and departed in an ambulance, scolding to the very last. This is the comic side of the matter. The serious one is harder to describe, for the presence, however brief, of relations and friends by the bedside of the dead or dying is always a trial to the bystanders. They are not near enough to know the best to comfort, yet too near to turn their backs upon the sorrow that finds its only solace in listening to recitals of last words breathed into nurses' ears, or receiving the tender legacies of love and longing bequeathed through them. To me, the saddest sight I saw in that sad place was the spectacle of a gray-haired father sitting hour after hour by his son, dying from the poison of his wound. The old father, hale and hearty, the young son past all help, though one could scarcely believe it, for the subtle fever, burning his strength away, flushed his cheeks with color, filled his eyes with luster, and lent a mournful mockery of health to his face and figure, making the poor lad comelier in death than in life. His bed was not in my ward, but I was often in and out, and for a day or two the pair were much together, saying little, but looking much. The old man tried to busy himself with book or pen, that his presence might not be a burden, and once when he sat writing to the anxious mother at home, doubtless, I saw the son's eyes fixed upon his face with a look of mingled resignation and regret, as if endeavoring to teach himself to say cheerfully the long goodbye. And again, when the son slept, the father watched him as he had himself been watched, and though no feature of his grave countenance changed, the rough hand smoothing the lock of hair upon the pillow, the bowed attitude of the gray head, were more pathetic than the loudest lamentations. The son died, and the father took home the pale relic of the life he gave, offering a little money to the nurse, as the only visible return it was in his power to make her, for though very grateful, he was poor. Of course, she did not take it, but found a richer compensation in the old man's earnest declaration. "My boy couldn't have been better cared for if he'd been at home, and God will reward ye for it, though I can't." My own experiences of this sort began when my first man died. He had scarcely been removed when his wife came in. Her eye went straight to the well-known bed. It was empty, and feeling, yet not believing the hard truth, she cried out with a look I never shall forget, "Why, where's Emmanuel?" I had never seen her before, did not know her relationship to the man whom I had only nursed for a day, and was about to tell her he was gone, when McGee, the tender-hearted Irishman before mentioned, brushed by me with a cheerful, "It's shifted to a better bed he is, Mrs. Connell. Come out, dear, till I show ye." And taking her gently by the arm, he led her to the matron, who broke the heavy tidings to the wife and comforted the widow. Another day, running up to my room for a breath of fresh air and a 5 minutes' rest after a disagreeable task, I found a stout young woman sitting on my bed, wearing the miserable look which I had learned to know by that time. Seeing her reminded me that I had heard of someone's dying in the night and his sisters arriving in the morning. This must be she, I thought. I pitied her with all my heart. What could I say or do? Words always seem impertinent at such times. I did not know the man. The woman was neither interesting in herself nor graceful in her grief, yet having known a sister's sorrow myself, I could have not leave her alone for her trouble in that strange place without a word. So, feeling heartsick, homesick, and not knowing what else to do, I just put my arms around her and began to cry, in a very helpless but hearty way, for, as I seldom indulge in this moist luxury, I like to enjoy it with all my might when I do. It so happened I could not have done a better thing, for, though not a word was spoken, each felt the other's sympathy, and, in the silence, our handkerchiefs were more eloquent than words. She soon sobbed herself quiet, and leaving her on my bed, I went back to work feeling much refreshed by the shower, though I'd forgotten to rest and had washed my face instead of my hands. I mention this successful experience as a receipt proved and approved for the use of any nurse who may find herself called upon to minister these wounds of the heart. They will find it more efficacious than cups of tea, smelling bottles, psalms, or sermons, for a friendly touch and a companionable cry unite the consolations of all the rest for womankind, and, if genuine, will be found a sovereign cure for the first sharp pang so many suffer in these heavy times. I am gratified to find that my little sergeant has found favor in several quarters, and gladly respond to sundry calls for news of him, though my personal knowledge ended 5 months ago. Next to my good John, I hope the grass is green above him, far away there in Virginia. I place the sergeant on my list of worthy boys, and many jovial chat have I enjoyed with the merry-hearted lad who had a fancy for fun when his poor arm was dressed. While Dr. P poked and strapped, I brushed the remains of the sergeant's brown mane, shorn sorely against his will, and gossiped with all my might, the boy making odd faces, exclamations, and appeals when nerves got the better of nonsense, as they sometimes did. I'd rather laugh than cry when I must sing out anyhow, so just say that bit from Dickens again, please, and I'll stand it like a man. He did, for Mrs. Cluppins, Chadband, and Sam Weller always helped him through, thereby causing me to lay another offering of love and admiration on the shrine of the god of my idolatry, though he does wear too much jewelry and talk slang. The sergeant also originated, I believe, the fashion of calling his neighbors by their afflictions instead of their names, and I was rather taken aback by hearing them bandy remarks of this sort with perfect good humor and much enjoyment of the new game. "Hello, old Fitz is off again. How are you, rheumatige? Will you trade apples ribs? I say, Miss P, may I give Typhus a drink of this? Look here, No-Toes, lend us a stamp, there's a good feller," etc. He himself was christened Baby B because he tended his arm on a little pillow and called it his infant. Very fussy about his grub was Sergeant B, and much trotting of attendance was necessary when he partook of nourishment. Anything more irresistibly wheedlesome I never saw, and constantly found myself indulging him, like the most weak-minded parent, merely for the pleasure of seeing his blue eyes twinkle, his merry mouth break into a smile, and his one hand execute a jaunty little salute that was entirely captivating. I am afraid that Nurse P damaged her dignity frolicking with this persuasive young gentleman, though done for his well-being, but boys will be boys is perfectly applicable to the case, for in spite of years, sex, and the prunes and prisms doctrine laid down for our use, I have a fellow feeling for lads, and always owed fate a grudge because I wasn't a lord of creation instead of a lady. Since I left, I have heard from a reliable source that my sergeant has gone home. Therefore, the small romance that budded the first day I saw him has blossomed into its second chapter, and I now imagine dearest Jane filling my place, tending the wounds I tended, brushing the curly jungle I brushed, loving the excellent little youth I loved, and eventually walking altarward with the sergeant, stumping gallantly at her side. If she doesn't do all this, and no end more, I'll never forgive her, and sincerely pray to the guardian saint of lovers that Baby B may prosper in his wooing and his name be long in the land. One of the lively episodes of hospital life is the frequent marching away of such as are well enough to rejoin their regiments or betake themselves to some convalescent camp. The wardmaster comes to the door of each room that is to be thinned, reads off a list of names, bids their owners look sharp and be ready when called for, and as he vanishes, the rooms fall into an indescribable state of topsy-turviness as the boys begin to black their boots, brighten spurs, if they have them, overhaul knapsacks, make presents, are fitted out with needfuls, and, well, Why not? Kissed sometimes, as they say goodbye, for in all human probability we shall never meet again, and a woman's heart yearns over anything that has clung to her for help and comfort. I never liked these breakings up of my little household, though my short stay showed me but 3. I was immensely gratified by the handshakes I got, for their somewhat painful cordiality assured me that I had not tried in vain. The big Prussian rumbled out his unintelligible adieu with a grateful face and premonitory smooth of his yellow moustache, but got no further, for someone else stepped up with a large brown hand extended, and this recommendation for our very faulty establishment. "We're off, ma'am, and I'm powerful sorry, for I'd no idea an 'orspital was such a jolly place. Hope I'll get another ball somewheres easy, so I'll come back and be took care on again. Mean, ain't it?" I didn't think so, but the doctrine of inglorious ease was not the right one to preach up, so I tried to look shocked, failed signally, and consoled myself by giving him the fat pincushion he had admired as the cutest little machine a-goin'. Then they fell into line in front of the house, looking rather wan and feeble, some of them, but trying to step out smartly and march in good order, though half the knapsacks were carried by the guard, and several leaned on sticks instead of shouldering guns. All looked up and smiled or waved their hands and touched their caps as they passed under our windows down the long street, and so away, some to their homes in this world, and some to that in the next, and for the rest of the day I felt like Rachel mourning for her children when I saw the empty beds and missed the familiar faces. You ask if nurses are obliged to witness amputations and such matters as part of their duty? I think not, unless they wish, for the patient is under the effects of ether and needs no care but such as the surgeons can best give. Our work begins afterwards, when the poor soul comes to himself sick, faint, and wandering, full of strange pains and confused visions of disagreeable sensations and sights. Then we must soothe and sustain, tend and watch, preaching and practicing patience, till sleep and time have restored courage and self-control. I witnessed several operations, for the height of my ambition was to go to the front after a battle, and feeling that the sooner I inured myself to trying sights, the more useful I should be. Several of my mates shrunk from such things, for though the spirit was wholly willing, the flesh was inconveniently weak. One funeral lady came to try her powers as a nurse, but a brief conversation eliciting the facts that she fainted at the sight of blood, was afraid to watch alone, couldn't possibly take care of delirious persons, was nervous about infections, and unable to bear much fatigue, she was mildly dismissed. I hope she found her sphere, but fancy a comfortable bandbox on a high shelf would best meet the requirements of her case. Dr. Z suggested that I should witness a dissection, but I never accepted his invitations, thinking that my nerves belonged to the living, not to the dead, and I had better finish my education as a nurse before I began that of a surgeon. But I never met the little man skipping through the hall with oddly shaped cases in his hand and an absorbed expression of countenance without being sure that a select party of surgeons were at work in the dead house, which idea was a rather trying one when I knew the subject was some person whom I had nursed and cared for. But this must not lead anyone to suppose that the surgeons were willfully hard or cruel, though one of them remorsefully confided to me that he feared his profession blunted his sensibilities and perhaps rendered him indifferent to the sight of pain. I am inclined to think that in some cases it does, for, though a capital surgeon and a kindly man, Dr. P, through long acquaintance with many of the ills flesh is heir to, had acquired a somewhat trying habit of regarding a man and his wound as separate institutions, and seemed rather annoyed that the former should express any opinion upon the latter or claim any right in it under his care. He had a way of twitching off a bandage and giving a limb a comprehensive sort of clutch, which, though no doubt entirely scientific, was rather startling than soothing, and highly objectionable as a means of preparing nerves for any fresh trial. He also expected the patient to assist in small operations, as he considered them, and to restrain all demonstrations during the process. "Here, my man, just hold it this way while I look into it a bit," he said one day to Fitz-G, putting a wounded arm into the keeping of a sound one, and proceeding to poke about among bits of bone and visible muscle in a red and black chasm made by some infernal machine of the shot or shell description. Poor Fitz held on like a grim death, ashamed to show fear before a woman, till it grew more than he could bear in silence, and, after a few smothered groans, he looked at me imploringly, as if to say, "I wouldn't, ma'am, if I could help it," and fainted quietly away. Dr. P looked up, gave a compassionate sort of cluck, and poked away more busily than ever, with a nod at me and a brief, "Never mind, be so good as to hold this till I finish." I obeyed, cherishing the while a strong desire to insinuate a few of his own disagreeable knives and scissors into him and see how he liked it. A very disrespectful and ridiculous fancy, of course, for he was doing all that could be done, and the arm prospered finely in his hands. But the human mind is prone to prejudice, and though a personable man, speaking French like a born parlez-vous, and whipping off legs like an animated guillotine, I must confess to a sense of relief when he was ordered elsewhere, and suspect that several of the men would have faced a rebel battery with less trepidation than they did Dr. P when he came briskly in on his morning round. As if to give us the pleasures of contrast, Dr. Z succeeded him, who I think suffered more in giving pain than did his patients in enduring it, for he often paused to ask, "Do I hurt you?" And seeing his solicitude, the boys invariably answered, "Not much, go ahead, doctor," though the lips that uttered this amiable fib might be white with pain as they spoke. Over the dressing of some of the wounds, we used to carry on conversations upon subjects foreign to the work in hand, that the patient might forget himself in the charms of our discourse. Christmas Eve was spent in this way, the doctor strapping the little sergeant's arm, I holding the lamp, while all three laughed and talked, as if anywhere but in a hospital ward, except when the chat was broken by a long-drawn "Oh!" from baby B, an abrupt request from the doctor to "hold the lamp a little higher, please," or an encouraging "most through, Sergeant," from Nurse P. The chief surgeon, Dr. O, I was told, refused the higher salary, greater honor, and less labor of an appointment to the officers' hospital round the corner, that he might serve the poor fellows at Hurly-Burly House, or go to the front, working there day and night among the horrors that succeeded the glories of a battle. I liked that so much that the quiet, brown-eyed doctor was my especial admiration, and when my own turn came, had more faith in him than in all the rest put together, although he did advise me to go home and authorize the consumption of blue pills. Speaking of the surgeons reminds me that, having found all manner of fault, it becomes me to celebrate the redeeming feature of Hurly-Burly House. I had been prepared by the accounts of others to expect much humiliation of spirit from the surgeons, and to be treated by them like a doormat, a worm, or any other meek and lowly article whose mission it is to be put down and walked upon, nurses being considered as mere servants receiving the lowest pay, and, it's my private opinion, doing the hardest work of any part of the army, except the mules. Great, therefore, was my surprise when I found myself treated with the utmost courtesy and kindness. Very soon my carefully prepared meekness was laid upon the shelf, and going from one extreme to the other, I more than once expressed a difference of opinion regarding sundry messes it was my painful duty to administer. As 8 of us nurses chanced to be off duty at once, we had an excellent opportunity of trying the virtues of these gentlemen, and I am bound to say they stood the test admirably as far as my personal observation went. Dr. O's stethoscope was unremitting in its attentions. Dr. S brought his buttons into my room twice a day with the regularity of a medical clock, while Dr. Z filled my table with neat little bottles which I never emptied, prescribed Browning, bedewed me with cologne, and kept my fire going as if, like the candles in St. Peter's, it must never be permitted to die out. Waking one cold night with the certainty that my last spark had pined away and died, and consequently hours of coughing were in store for me, I was amazed to see a ruddy light dancing upon the wall, a jolly blaze roaring up the chimney, and down upon his knees before it, Dr. Z whittling shavings. I ought to have risen up and thanked him on the spot, but, knowing that he was one of those who like to do good by stealth, I only peeped at him as if he were a friendly ghost, till, having made things as cozy as the most motherly of nurses could have done, he crept away, leaving me to feel, as somebody says, as if angels were a watching of me in my sleep, though that species of wild fowl do not usually descend in broadcloth and glasses. I afterwards discovered that he split the wood himself on that cool January midnight, and went about making or mending fires for the poor old ladies in their dismal dens, thus causing himself to be felt a bright and shining light in more ways than one. I never thanked him as I ought, therefore I publicly make a note of it, and further aggravate that modest M.D. by saying that if this was not being the best of doctors and the gentlest of gentlemen, I shall be happy to see any improvement upon it. To such as wish to know where these scenes took place, I must respectfully decline to answer, for Hurly-Burly House has ceased to exist as a hospital, so let it rest with all its sins upon its head, perhaps I should say chimney-top. When the nurses felt ill, the doctors departed, and the patients got well, I believe the concern gently faded from existence, or was merged into some other and better establishment, where I hope the washing of 300 sick people is done out of the house, the food is eatable, and mortal women are not expected to possess an angelic exemption from all wants and the endurance of truck horses. Since the appearance of these hasty sketches, I have heard from several of my comrades at the hospital, and their approval assures me that I have not let sympathy and fancy run away with me, as that lively team is apt to do when harnessed to a pen. As no two persons see the same thing with the same eyes, my view of hospital life must be taken through my glass and held for what it is worth. Certainly nothing was set down in malice, and to the serious-minded party who objected to a tone of levity in some portions of the sketches, I can only say that it is a part of my religion to look well after the cheerfulnesses of life, and let the dismals shift for themselves, believing, with good Sir Thomas More, that it is wise to be merry in God. The next hospital I enter will, I hope, be one for the colored regiments, as they seem to be proving their right to the admiration and kind offices of their white relations, who owe them so large a debt, a little part of which I shall be so proud to pay. Yours, with a firm faith in the good time coming, Tribulation Periwinkle. End of Hospital Sketches by Louisa May Alcott.